I gifted my parents a $583,000 seaside mansion in Martha's Vineyard for their 50th anniversary. But when I pulled up the gravel driveway, my mother was crying, and my father was trembling on the porch. Their luggage was dumped in the dirt. My husband's family had completely taken over. My mother-in-law Beatrice stepped toward my mom, pointed to the driveway, and yelled that this was her house and they needed to get out. That is when I walked up the steps and dead silence fell over the porch. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to put entitled in-laws in their place. My name is Maya, and I am 32 years old. I built a commercial real estate holding company from nothing, breaking my back to make sure my parents Elias and Ruth could finally rest. They spent 40 years cleaning office buildings and doing manual labor in Atlanta so I could get a college degree. Buying them this home was supposed to be my ultimate thank you. Instead, I found myself standing in front of my own front door, blocked by Beatrice. She wore a pristine white linen dress, her church committee pearls gleaming in the afternoon sun. Next to her was Chloe, the 29-year-old wife of my husband's brother. Chloe, a white woman who had married into our African-American family 2 years ago, was lounging against the doorframe. She was sipping a mimosa from one of the crystal glasses I had specifically ordered for my parents' anniversary toast. My mother wiped a tear from her cheek, her hands shaking as she tried to pick up her canvas overnight bag. Chloe swirled her drink, looking down at my mother with a pitying smirk. "Ruth, please do not yell," Chloe said, her voice dripping with that fake, fragile sweetness she always weaponized against me. "David bought this house for Beatrice. Besides, people who spent their entire lives scrubbing floors should not touch smart home thermostats anyway. You might break something." The sheer disrespect in her tone paralyzed my parents, who were too deeply conditioned to be polite and accommodating to ever fight back. But I was not my parents. I did not say a single word. I marched straight up the wooden steps, closed the distance between us, and slapped the crystal glass right out of Chloe's hand. The crystal glass shattered violently against the wooden porch floor, splashing orange juice and expensive champagne all over her pristine designer sandals. Chloe let out a loud, high-pitched shriek, immediately jumping back and clutching her chest as if she had been physically assaulted. Beatrice gasped loudly, quickly putting herself between me and the door to protect her precious daughter-in-law. "Have you lost your mind, Maya?" Beatrice shouted, her carefully maintained church lady facade cracking as her face turned red with anger. "You do not come to my property and attack my family." I stepped closer, staring directly into my mother-in-law's eyes, refusing to back down an inch. "Your property?" I asked, my voice low. "I wrote the check for this house 3 days ago. I picked out the furniture. I put the keys in my father's hand. Who gave you the right to open your mouth and call my parents trash on property that my money paid for?" Before Beatrice could formulate an excuse, the heavy oak front door swung wide open. My husband David stepped out onto the porch. He was 34, usually wearing the mask of a highly successful tech executive, but right now he just looked like a coward playing king of a castle he did not build. He held his hands up in a placating gesture, completely ignoring the fact that his own wife's parents were standing on the lawn with their bags packed. "Maya, lower your voice and stop acting so aggressive," David said deliberately, using that specific word he knew triggered me. "You are scaring Chloe. Do not cause a scene in front of the neighbors." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of thick paper, waving it like a shield. "I transferred the deed, Maya. I took care of the paperwork this morning. My mother needs this house to host her upcoming church gala next month. It is a huge opportunity for her status in the congregation. Your parents can rent a cheap motel in the next town over for the weekend. They are used to roughing it anyway." He shoved the property deed toward my chest, expecting me to break down. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not give them the angry reaction they desperately wanted to use against me. I pulled out my phone, bypassed my husband entirely, and called my private black car service. I told the driver to pick up my parents immediately and take them to the presidential suite at the Harbor Hotel, charging it directly to my black card. I turned to my father, promising him that this was only a temporary delay and that I would handle these intruders soon. Then I snatched the deed from David's hand. I stared at the forged signature at the bottom. It was a signature he truly thought belonged to me as an individual, one he had clearly spent hours practicing to perfect. I smiled coldly at the man I had married, feeling absolutely no love left in my heart for him or his greedy family. "You did not just steal a house from your wife today, David," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent porch. "You just committed federal wire fraud against my corporate holding company." The color immediately drained from his face as he finally realized his fatal mistake. This battle was just beginning, and I planned to destroy them all. The black town car glided away from the stolen mansion, leaving my husband and his family standing in the driveway. I sat in the back seat with my parents, and the silence was thick and heavy. My father, Elias, kept staring down at his calloused hands. These were the hands that had scrubbed industrial floors and repaired drywall for 40 years to put me through college. I grabbed his hand tightly. He looked up with tears in his eyes, telling me he was sorry for causing trouble and that they could just take the ferry back. I shook my head. I told him we were not running from anyone. We pulled up to the Harbor Hotel, which was the most exclusive resort on the island. The concierge recognized me immediately. I handed him my Black American Express card requesting the presidential suite for the week. The clerk did not blink at the $2,000 a night price tag. When we stepped into the penthouse overlooking the ocean, my mother gasped. It had a wraparound balcony, a private dining room, and a marble soaking tub. My father set his worn canvas bag on the imported rug, looking completely out of place. He whispered that I should not waste my hard-earned money on them. I told him this was not a waste at all. I told him this was my new war room. I made sure they ordered room service from the premium menu before I excused myself to the master bedroom. It was time to assess the real damage. I locked the heavy oak door behind me and pulled my laptop from my tote bag. I needed to see exactly how much damage David had done behind my back. When we first married, I made David the financial manager of our personal joint accounts. He had a degree in finance, and it made him feel important to handle the daily transfers while I ran my commercial real estate empire. I had trusted him blindly because he was my husband. That was my first and greatest mistake. I used my primary administrative credentials to access our complete financial portfolio. My eyes scanned the ledgers. The property deed transfer for the Seaside mansion was pending with the county clerk, but that was not what made my blood run cold. I clicked on our primary high-yield savings account. The balance, which should have sat at $200,000, was currently sitting at exactly $50,000. I refreshed the page thinking it was a banking glitch. It was not. At 8 o'clock that morning, while I was boarding a plane to surprise my parents, David had executed a wire transfer. $150,000 was completely gone. He had drained the account that I funded with my own corporate bonuses. My hands hovered over the keyboard as a wave of pure nausea washed over me. He did not just steal a house to appease his mother. He had robbed my life savings. He had taken the money I earned from closing commercial leases and wiped it out in a single click. My phone vibrated violently against the desk. It was a text message from David. I picked it up expecting an explanation or an apology for the scene on the porch. Instead, his message read exactly like the entitled coward he was. He told me I needed to calm down and stop acting like an angry black woman. He said my behavior embarrassed his mother and that I needed to call Chloe immediately to apologize because my aggression had scared her. He wrote that I was lucky they were willing to overlook my ghetto outburst if I signed the remaining waiver for the property deed. I read the text 3 times over. He was weaponizing the same racist tropes his white sister-in-law used against me, trying to gaslight me into absolute submission. He really thought I was just going to cry and beg for his affection like a wounded animal. He forgot exactly who he married. I did not text back. I did not call him to scream or argue. I switched tabs on my computer and logged directly into the master terminal for all our banking institutions. With 3 swift clicks, I removed his administrative access. With 4 clicks, I suspended his primary checking account. With 5 clicks, I froze every single secondary credit card attached to my name. I watched the status bars turn red across the screen, locking him out of my wealth completely. He was officially cut off from everything. He had $0 and zero access to my empire. I walked over to the minibar and poured myself a glass of sparkling water, feeling my heartbeat steady into a calm and lethal rhythm. I took a sip, looking out at the dark ocean waves crashing against the shoreline. Suddenly, a loud ping echoed from my laptop. It was an automated fraud alert from the bank. An attempted charge of $20,000 at an elite catering company in Atlanta had just been declined on David's Platinum card. The system flagged it immediately due to the account freeze. 10 seconds later, my cell phone started ringing. The caller ID flashed Beatrice. My mother-in-law was calling. The phone buzzed relentlessly, dancing across the polished mahogany desk. I picked it up and swiped to answer, bringing the receiver to my ear without saying a single word. Beatrice was already screaming at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with pure panic and rage. She shrieked that the caterer for her church gala was threatening to walk out because the deposit bounced. She demanded to know what I did to her son's money. I took another slow sip of my water, smiled at the beautiful view, and prepared to give her the reality check she had been begging for all day. I held the phone slightly away from my ear as Beatrice shrieked. The background noise of her elite church planning committee echoed clearly through the receiver. I could hear the sharp clinking of fine china and the hushed gasps of the wealthy congregation ladies she so desperately wanted to impress. Beatrice was practically hyperventilating. She demanded to know why the $20,000 catering deposit had just bounced in front of the entire event planning board. She screamed that the executive chef was actively packing up his truffle hors d'oeuvres and silver chafing dishes because her card was declined with insufficient funds. "Maya, you vindictive little brat!" Beatrice hissed, her voice vibrating with a panic she was frantically trying to hide from her peers. "You call the bank right now and authorize this charge. The First Lady of the congregation is sitting right across from me. You are humiliating me in front of the entire sanctuary board." I leaned against the glass balcony door of my suite. "I am not humiliating you, Beatrice," I said, my voice perfectly level. "You are humiliating yourself by trying to finance a high society gala with a stolen credit card. That account belongs to my corporate holding firm. You and David have absolutely no legal right to it." The line went dead quiet for a fraction of a second. I could hear the executive chef in the background telling his staff to load the van. Beatrice lost whatever shred of Christian grace she pretended to possess. Her voice dropped into a vicious and venomous snarl. "You owe this family," she spat. "You owe David for elevating you. If it was not for my son lowering his standards to marry you, you would still be a ghetto girl from the south side of Atlanta trying to hustle leases. We gave you class. We gave you a respectable name. Now unfreeze that card before I ruin you." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "You did not give me class, Beatrice. You gave me a parasitic liability, and as of 10 minutes ago that liability is bankrupt. Tell the committee ladies I said hello." I pressed the end call button, cutting off her frantic scream. I blocked her number immediately. A profound sense of peace washed over me. For years I had bitten my tongue to keep the peace. I had paid for her luxury cars, funded her extravagant church donations, and smiled through her relentless insults about my working-class parents. I had played the good, supportive wife to a man who secretly despised my success. That era was officially over. My father walked into the living area of the suite holding a cup of coffee. He looked at me with deep concern in his eyes. He asked if everything was all right, and if David was coming to apologize for the scene at the house. I walked over and kissed my father on the cheek. I told him David was never going to apologize, and that we were going to enjoy our week on the island without him. I assured my father that he and Mom were completely safe. I then excused myself back to the bedroom. I had a financial empire to protect and a husband to financially bury. I opened my laptop and pulled up my secure contacts. I dialed the direct line for Marcus, my lead forensic accountant. Marcus was a former government investigator who handled all the complex audits for my commercial real estate firm. He was ruthless, brilliant, and completely loyal to me. He answered on the first ring. "Marcus, I have an emergency," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "David forged my signature on a property deed transfer this morning. More importantly, he initiated a wire transfer of $150,000 out of our joint high-yield savings account. I need you to track every single penny of that money. I want to know exactly what bank it hit, whose name is on the routing number, and what shell company it might be hiding behind." Marcus did not waste time asking emotional questions. He immediately asked for the account numbers and the exact timestamp of the wire transfer. He told me to give him 2 hours. He said if David moved that money electronically, he would find it, peel back the layers, and hand me the exact coordinates of the theft. I spent the next 2 hours securing the rest of my assets. I changed the passwords on all my personal and corporate accounts. I contacted my primary legal team to begin drafting a formal separation agreement and a civil suit for the stolen funds. I also called my private security firm in Atlanta, instructing them to change the locks on my primary residence and deny David entry if he tried to return home early. I was sealing every exit so my husband had nowhere to run. As I worked, I thought about David's motivations. He had always been intimidated by my earning power. He constantly needed to play the big shot provider for his mother and his brother Marcus. He used my money to fund his family's illusions of grandeur. But $150,000 was a massive amount of liquid cash to move in a single morning, even for David. It was too much for just a simple gala deposit or a house transfer fee. Something else was happening behind the scenes. My phone rang sharply, jolting me out of my thoughts. It was Marcus. I answered immediately, my pulse quickening. "What did you find?" I asked, pulling up a blank document on my screen to take notes. "You were right to be suspicious," Marcus said, his tone dead serious. "David is incredibly sloppy. He tried to route the funds through a secondary checking account to wash the trail. But it took me exactly 45 minutes to find the final destination." "Did he wire it to Beatrice?" I asked, bracing myself for the confirmation that my husband had stolen my money to buy his mother's affection. "No," Marcus replied, the sound of his keyboard clacking echoing over the line. "Maya, he did not give the $150,000 to his mother. The wire transfer cleared an hour ago. The entire amount was deposited into a commercial business account for an LLC registered in the state of Georgia." I frowned, completely confused. "Which LLC?" Marcus paused for a fraction of a second, letting the weight of his next words sink in. "It is registered as Chloe Couture. He wired your life savings directly to an LLC owned exclusively by your sister-in-law, Chloe." I hung up the phone with Marcus. The silence in my hotel suite was absolute and deafening. David had stolen $150,000 of my money and handed it to Chloe. Chloe, the woman who had stood on my front porch 24 hours ago and mocked my parents for having working-class hands. I did not scream or throw anything. I packed my laptop into my bag, called my driver, and headed straight to the private airfield. Martha's Vineyard was no longer the front line. The real war was waiting for me back in Atlanta. By 8 o'clock the next morning, I was sitting behind the custom marble desk in my corner office in downtown Atlanta. My legal team was already drafting the civil suits and divorce filings. I was reviewing the asset freeze confirmations when my intercom buzzed. My receptionist, Sarah, sounded frantic. She told me there was a woman in the lobby causing a massive disturbance. Security was on their way up, but the woman was hysterically crying and screaming my name. I stood up and walked to the glass walls of my office, looking down at the main reception area. There she was. Chloe was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She wore a designer trench coat that my money had probably paid for. Her blonde hair was messy, and her makeup was carefully smudged to make her look completely distraught. She was sobbing into her hands, telling a crowd of my confused employees that I was a monster. She wailed that I was financially abusing my husband, freezing his bank accounts, and trying to destroy their family out of sheer jealousy. She played the fragile victim flawlessly, leaning heavily against the reception desk, as if she might faint from the sheer terror of my existence. I opened my office door and stepped out into the bullpen. Every eye on the floor turned to me. I signaled for the approaching security guards to stand down. I walked calmly toward the reception desk, my heels clicking sharply against the polished concrete floor. Chloe looked up, her blue eyes wide and brimming with fresh tears. She gasped and took a dramatic step back as if I were about to physically strike her. "Maya, please," Chloe whimpered, making sure her voice was loud enough for the entire floor to hear. "You have to stop this. You are hurting David. You are hurting all of us. Why are you being so vindictive?" I did not entertain her public theater. I grabbed her by the arm. My grip was tight enough to let her know the show was over. I marched her away from the audience and straight into the nearest glass conference room. I shut the heavy soundproof door behind us, instantly cutting off the murmurs of my staff. I pointed to a leather chair. I told her to sit down and explain exactly why she was trespassing in my corporate headquarters. Chloe did not sit. She crossed her arms and her lower lip trembled as she continued her act. "I am here because David is a total wreck," she cried. "You froze his accounts without warning. My boutique is launching our spring line next week, and the vendors are threatening to withhold my inventory because the secondary card was declined. You need to unfreeze those accounts immediately. You are always so aggressive and angry, Maya. David just wants to provide for us, and you are punishing him for being a good man." I stared at her. The sheer entitlement radiating from her was suffocating. She truly believed that my husband owed her my wealth. She truly believed that throwing around words like aggressive and angry would shame me into compliance. I walked over to the conference table and picked up a manila folder I had printed out just an hour ago. I tossed it onto the glass table between us. The thick stack of paper slid across the smooth surface and hit her hands. "David provided for you using my money," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady. "I want you to open that folder, Chloe. I want you to look at the highlighted wire transfer from yesterday morning. $150,000 was drained from a high-yield savings account that I funded. It was wired directly to an LLC registered in your name. So I'm going to ask you a very simple question. Why is my husband funding his white sister-in-law's failing boutique with my money?" Chloe looked down at the bank statement. The tears instantly dried up. The trembling lip vanished. Her posture straightened, and the fragile victim facade completely melted away, revealing the cold and calculating opportunist underneath. She scoffed and tossed the folder back onto the table with a look of utter disgust. "Do not act so shocked, Maya," Chloe sneered, her voice losing all its false sweetness. "You are never home. You are always traveling, always working, always obsessing over your real estate deals. You think making money makes you a good wife. It does not. David is miserable. He feels emasculated by you. He wants to feel like a provider, like a real man who takes care of his family. He gave me that money because he believes in my vision. He is an investor in my brand. He knows you are too busy being a boss to be a real wife, so he put his resources where they would actually be appreciated." She smiled a wicked and triumphant smile. She fully believed she had just delivered a devastating blow to my ego. She thought she was hurting my pride by confirming that my husband resented my success and preferred playing savior to her. Instead of getting angry, I smiled back. I reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and tapped the screen to end the active voice recording. The audio file saved instantly, backing up to my secure cloud server. "Thanks, Chloe," I said smoothly, stepping toward the door and opening it wide. "I just needed you to admit on the record that you knowingly accepted stolen corporate funds." Chloe's jaw actually dropped, her perfectly glossed lips parting in sheer horror. The realization of what she had just done washed over her face, draining it of all color. She lunged forward, her hands slapping against the glass table, screaming that I could not record her without permission. I calmly informed her that she was standing inside my corporate headquarters, a private commercial building with visible security placards, explicitly stating that all audio and video were monitored. Before she could muster another excuse, the heavy glass door swung open. Two of my building's armed security guards stepped inside, their expressions completely unamused. I pointed at Chloe, instructing them to escort her off the premises and to ensure she never bypassed the lobby desk again. She shrieked and thrashed, threatening to sue me, but the guards simply flanked her and marched her out of the suite. I watched her designer heels drag across the carpet, feeling absolutely nothing but cold satisfaction. I immediately forwarded the audio file to my legal team. The trap was set and the jaws were rapidly closing around my husband's family. By 8 o'clock that evening, I had pushed the family drama aside to focus on my empire. I was hosting a private dinner at L'Etoile, a 3-Michelin-star restaurant in the heart of Buckhead, known for its impossible reservation list and astronomical prices. I was entertaining a group of highly influential commercial developers. Among them was Trenton Vance, a legendary former NFL defensive tackle who had pivoted his athletic fortune into a massive real estate syndicate. Trenton was a mountain of a man, standing 6'5", with shoulders as wide as a doorframe, but he possessed a brilliant analytical mind. We were celebrating the final stages of a joint venture, sipping imported sparkling water, and reviewing architectural blueprints spread across the white linen tablecloth in our semi-private alcove. Julian, the general manager of L'Etoile and a close personal friend of mine for years, had personally overseen our service. He had just poured our table a fresh round of vintage Bordeaux when my eyes caught a familiar flash of pearl-white linen near the front entrance. It was Beatrice. She was strutting into the main dining room like royalty, wearing an obnoxious sequined evening gown, closely followed by Chloe and David. David looked frantic and exhausted, sweating through his expensive tailored suit. He had clearly brought his mother and sister-in-law here to prove he still had power. I could practically read his desperate strategy from across the room. He was trying to assure them that the declined catering deposit was just a banking error, treating them to a 5-star dinner to maintain the illusion of his wealth. He had absolutely no idea I was sitting 30 feet away, cloaked by the dim ambient lighting and the tall floral arrangements of my alcove. I watched them order with reckless abandon. Beatrice flagged down the sommelier, demanding the most expensive bottles of champagne. Chloe pointed at the menu, ordering imported caviar Wagyu beef and shaved truffles. They were laughing and clinking crystal glasses, celebrating a lifestyle funded entirely by my stolen money. I leaned back in my chair, catching Julian's eye as he walked past my table. I gave him a subtle, knowing nod. He glanced over at David's table, then back at me, understanding exactly what was about to happen. I had frozen every single account tied to David's social security number. There was no secret stash. There was no backup card. 2 hours later, the inevitable reality check arrived. A server placed a sleek black leather billfold on their table. David pulled a sleek titanium credit card from his wallet with a confident smirk, tossing it onto the tray. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The smug smiles on Beatrice and Chloe's faces began to slip as Julian personally marched back to their table. He was not holding a pen for a signature. He was holding the declined receipt. "Sir, this card has been declined," Julian announced. His voice was perfectly professional, but intentionally loud enough to carry across the quiet, sophisticated dining room. Heads from adjacent tables began to turn. David's face flushed a deep, violent crimson. He stammered, snatching the card back and shoving another one onto the tray. He aggressively told Julian to run it again, claiming there was a fraud alert he just needed to clear. Julian stood his ground, sliding the second card into his handheld terminal. It beeped a harsh, flat tone of rejection. "Declined again," Sir Julian stated, his voice ringing out crystal clear. "I must insist on a valid form of payment immediately. The bill is just over $4,000. Chloe shrank into her seat, holding her designer clutch over her face to hide from the staring patrons. Beatrice, however, reacted with explosive indignation. She shot up from her chair, her sequined gown catching the chandelier light, and pointed a manicured finger directly at Julian's chest. "Do you know who I am?" Beatrice demanded, her voice cracking with humiliated rage. "I am the First Lady of the Heritage Congregation. My son is a highly successful finance executive. Your machine is clearly broken. You will respect us and fix this issue right now, or I will have your job." Julian did not flinch. He clasped his hands behind his back, staring down the furious older woman. "Ma'am, your son's cards are registering as completely frozen for suspected fraud. If you cannot produce a valid alternative payment for the thousands of dollars of food and alcohol you just consumed, I will be forced to call the Atlanta Police Department and have you all arrested for theft of services." The word arrested echoed through the dining room. Complete silence fell over the surrounding tables. Wealthy patrons paused with their forks halfway to their mouths, watching the spectacle. Beatrice gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been shot. She looked at David, who was violently, aggressively tapping his phone, completely out of options. The reality of police arriving and dragging the First Lady of the congregation out in handcuffs finally broke her arrogant facade. With trembling hands and a face flushed with absolute mortification, Beatrice reached up to her earlobes. She unclasped her massive, flawless diamond earrings, the very same earrings she flaunted every Sunday to prove her superior status. She dropped them onto the silver tray with a heavy clatter. She told Julian through gritted teeth to keep them as collateral until morning. Julian picked up the tray with a curt nod, leaving them sitting in a pool of their own public disgrace. David suddenly stood up, his eyes darting wildly around the restaurant in a state of sheer panic. That was when his gaze finally locked onto my alcove. He saw me sitting there, composed, a glass of Bordeaux in my hand, watching his entire downfall unfold. The realization hit him like a freight train. He knew I had orchestrated the absolute freeze. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged fury. He shoved his chair back, ignoring the stares of the entire restaurant, and stormed directly toward my table. He bypassed the privacy screens, completely ignoring the billionaire developers sitting with me. His chest was heaving as he closed the distance. Before I could even stand up, David reached out and aggressively grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my skin with violent intent. Trenton Vance did not hesitate. The former NFL defensive tackle rose from his chair with terrifying speed and silence. His massive frame completely eclipsed my husband. Trenton reached out, wrapping his giant calloused hand around David's wrist. With a single effortless twist, Trenton peeled David's fingers off my arm, applying enough pressure to make David gasp in sudden pain. Trenton stepped forward, looming over David, casting a massive shadow across the table. "Is there a problem here?" Maya Trenton asked, his deep, resonant voice rumbling through the quiet restaurant, never taking his intense, menacing gaze off my trembling husband. "No problem at all, Trenton," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly calm. "This is just a former associate realizing he no longer has sufficient funds to participate in my life." Trenton let go of David's wrist with a dismissive shove. David stumbled backward, his face pale and slick with a cold sweat. He looked from Trenton to the other billionaire developers at the table, realizing he was completely outmatched in every possible arena. He turned and fled the restaurant like a beaten dog, leaving his mother's diamond earrings hostage on a silver tray. After successfully closing the Buckhead real estate deal, I returned to my penthouse suite at the St. Regis. I had instructed my private security firm to keep my actual house locked down, preferring the anonymous, highly secured luxury of a high-rise, while the divorce and civil fraud papers were being finalized. It was past midnight. I had just changed into a silk robe and was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the glowing Atlanta skyline when I heard the heavy electronic click of the suite door. David stepped into the dark entryway. He must have bullied or manipulated a night manager, leveraging his status as my legal husband and turning on the charm to get a master keycard. He looked entirely pathetic. His expensive tie was carelessly loosened. His designer jacket was wrinkled, and the arrogant, untouchable swagger he usually carried was completely gone. He shut the door behind him and took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. He tried the soft approach first. "Maya, baby, please. We need to talk. This has gone way too far." I did not move from the window. I slid my hand deep into the pocket of my robe, unlocked my phone by touch, and silently pressed the record button. I needed every single word he was about to say fully documented for the criminal fraud investigators. My silence forced him to keep talking, to keep digging his own grave. "How did you get in here, David?" I asked, keeping my voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "I am your husband. We are family," he said, taking a step forward into the living room, his hands raised in a placating surrender gesture. "Maya, look at what you are doing. Look at the destruction you are causing. You are blowing this completely out of proportion. We are a successful Black couple. We represent Black family unity. Do you know how rare that is? We are supposed to build an empire together. Instead, you are tearing our entire family apart over what pride? It is just a house, Maya. You can buy 10 more. I turned to face him, letting the sheer, unadulterated audacity of his words hang in the quiet room. Just a house. It was a seaside mansion that I bought with my own cash for my parents. The parents who broke their backs performing manual labor for 40 years so I could sit in this exact suite. You gave it away like a party favor. David sighed heavily, running a hand over his face, adopting a tone of exhausted condescension. He looked at me as if I were a stubborn, unreasonable child. My mother sacrificed everything for me. Your parents are used to nothing. They have lived their whole lives with nothing. Why can't you just let her have this win in front of her congregation? She needed that property to host her events, to show those stuck-up committee women she finally made it to the top. The absolute disregard for my parents was staggering, but I refused to give him the emotional explosion he desperately wanted to use against me. I kept my voice perfectly measured, locking my eyes onto his. And what about the $150,000, David? Did your mother need my life savings to show her congregation she made it too? David shifted his weight nervously, his eyes darting to the marble floor before snapping back to me. He puffed out his chest, trying to reclaim his authority as a brilliant financial manager. That money was an investment. You are being hysterical about standard business practices. I moved that capital because Chloe's boutique was launching a spring line and needed immediate liquidity to cover production costs. It was a bridge loan, Maya. A short-term bridge loan with a guaranteed high return on investment. I am a finance guy. I know exactly what I'm doing. I was going to put the money right back into the joint account before you even noticed it was gone. I let out a low, dry laugh. He was so incredibly arrogant that he actually believed he could outsmart me with basic financial jargon. I walked over to my leather work tote sitting on the kitchen island. I pulled out a thick certified folder provided by my forensic accountant earlier that afternoon. I walked back toward him and stopped just a few feet away, close enough to see the panic rising in his chest. A bridge loan, I repeated, tasting the pathetic lie on my tongue. You really think I am that stupid, David? You really think I did not have my elite forensic team audit every single ledger connected to your name? I am telling you the truth, he snapped, his voice pitching higher with defensive panic. It was just a temporary bridge loan for Chloe. I shook my head slowly, looking at him with absolute terrifying pity. I pulled a heavily highlighted bank document from the folder and held it up right in front of his face. It wasn't a bridge loan, David, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the silence of the room like a razor blade. I tracked the routing numbers. I tracked the wire transfers you tried to wash through dummy accounts. You did not just steal my money to play big shot investor for your brother's wife. David stared at the document, the color rapidly draining from his face as his eyes tracked the highlighted account numbers. He suddenly stopped breathing, his entire body going rigid. I dropped the paper onto the glass coffee table between us. You mortgaged Beatrice's actual house in Atlanta to cover your tracks. You took out a predatory high-interest second mortgage on your own mother's primary residence to replace the funds you stole from me. And because I froze all your accounts today, the automatic payment bounced. You put your own mother's primary residence in active foreclosure to fund Chloe's business. David stumbled back from the glass coffee table as if the bank document had physically burned him. He opened his mouth to formulate another lie, to spin another elaborate financial excuse, but his voice completely failed him. The reality of his catastrophic mismanagement had finally breached his wall of arrogance. He turned and practically ran out of my hotel suite, the heavy door slamming shut behind him. I picked up my phone, saved the active audio recording to my encrypted cloud drive, and finally went to sleep. The next morning, I was back behind the desk at my corporate headquarters, finalizing the asset freeze injunctions with my legal team. My assistant Sarah buzzed my intercom at precisely 11 o'clock. She sounded uncharacteristically hesitant, informing me that an unannounced guest was demanding to see me in the lobby. It was Pastor Thomas Jenkins, the head of the Heritage Congregation, the exact church where my mother-in-law Beatrice held her self-appointed title of First Lady. I told Sarah to send him up. I already knew exactly why he was here. Beatrice, blissfully unaware that her beloved son had secretly put her primary residence into foreclosure, was still fixated on her precious Martha's Vineyard gala. She had deployed her ultimate spiritual weapon to force me into submission. Pastor Jenkins strolled into my corner office wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that looked entirely too expensive for a modest church salary. He carried a thick leather-bound Bible under his right arm and wore an expression of practiced, sorrowful disappointment. I gestured to the guest chair across from my desk, but he chose to remain standing. He was clearly attempting to physically tower over me and assert his patriarchal authority. "Sister Maya." He began, his voice dropping into the deep, resonant cadence he used during his Sunday sermons. "My heart is heavy today. Sister Beatrice came to me in tears this morning. She shared the deeply troubling news that you are allowing pride and worldly greed to tear your marriage apart." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, steepling my fingers together. I did not offer him a polite smile or a glass of water. I waited in absolute silence, forcing him to continue his performance without receiving any validation from me. He cleared his throat, slightly unnerved by my complete lack of reaction, but quickly recovered his righteous momentum. "The scripture tells us that a wise woman builds her house, but a foolish one tears it down with her own hands. You are freezing David out of his own accounts. You are denying Beatrice a simple joy, a location for a charity gala that honors the Lord and our community. A wife must respect her husband's leadership, Maya. You must respect your elders. Beatrice has sacrificed so much for her family." He stepped closer to my desk, placing both hands flat on the polished marble surface, leaning in to deliver his final blow. "I am here to pray the anger out of your heart. I am here to counsel you to do the Christian thing. Sign the legal usage rights of the Martha's Vineyard property over to Beatrice for the weekend. Let her host her event. Apologize to David. Restore the sanctity of your home before the devil takes permanent root in your marriage." I stared at him. The sheer, unadulterated manipulation was breathtaking. Beatrice had literally weaponized her pastor, sending him to my place of business to guilt-trip me into financing her high society delusions under the guise of religious duty. She actually thought quoting scripture would make me hand over the keys to a multi-million-dollar estate. I slowly rolled my chair forward. I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a thick black binder. I placed it squarely between his hands on the marble. "Pastor Jenkins," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and measured, "do you know why I am so incredibly successful in real estate? It is because I read every single ledger. I review every single financial disclosure. I know exactly where every dollar goes, and I never make an investment without knowing the full picture." I flipped the binder open. Inside were the quarterly financial reports for the Heritage congregation. I had my accountants pull the public tax filings and cross-reference them with my own private charitable giving portfolios. I tapped my manicured fingernail against a specific line item on the spreadsheet. The church recently received a massive influx of capital. A brand new copper roof was installed last month. The youth center was completely renovated with state-of-the-art computers. And according to these operational expense reports, the senior pastor received a highly generous 30% salary increase. Pastor Jenkins frowned, his righteous posture faltering. He looked down at the ledger, clearly confused as to why I possessed his church's financial records. "The Lord provides," he answered defensively, puffing out his chest. "We were blessed by a very generous anonymous benefactor, a faithful servant who goes by the name Grace, 77. I closed the binder with a sharp, definitive snap that echoed loudly in the large office. "My middle name is Grace," I stated, locking my eyes directly onto his. "And I was born in 1977. The color instantly drained from Pastor Jenkins' face. His jaw went slack, and he took a sudden, staggering step back from my desk, as if the marble had just turned into burning coals. He looked from the black binder to my face, the horrifying realization clicking into place. He had just spent the last 5 minutes scolding, lecturing, and trying to manipulate the sole financial pillar holding up his entire congregation. "You," he breathed, his deep preacher voice completely vanishing, replaced by a high, thin wheeze. "You are Grace, 77, I am. I replied smoothly, crossing my arms over my chest. I believe in giving back to the community. I believe in supporting youth programs and maintaining historic community buildings. What I do not believe in, Pastor, is having my own charitable contributions weaponized against me to fund the frivolous stolen vacations of my entitled mother-in-law. He began to stammer, his hands waving erratically in front of him as he desperately tried to backpedal. Sister Maya, please, I had no idea. Beatrice told me a completely different story. She said you were being spiteful, that you were hoarding David's hard-earned wealth. I was only trying to mediate a family dispute. I would never have spoken to you that way had I known the truth of your immense generosity. I stood up, rising to my full height, matching his earlier attempt at intimidation. You came into my office to tell me to submit to a man who just stole $150,000 of my money. You came here to tell me to hand over a seaside estate to a woman who openly mocks my working-class parents. So let me be very clear about how this mediation is going to conclude. I walked around the desk, backing him toward the heavy glass door of my office. If Beatrice sets one single foot on my property in Martha's Vineyard, my donations to the Heritage Congregation stop permanently. If she hosts her stolen gala anywhere near my assets, the funding for your youth center disappears today. The copper roof payments cease, and your 30% salary increase will be revoked so fast your head will spin. Pastor Jenkins was visibly sweating now. The confident, booming spiritual leader had been reduced to a terrified employee staring down the barrel of a massive budget deficit. He nodded frantically, his hands clutching his Bible to his chest like a protective shield against my wrath. I understand completely, Miss Maya. I mean, Sister Maya. I apologize deeply for the intrusion. I was severely misinformed by Beatrice. I will rectify this immediately. I assure you the church stands with you. He turned and practically bolted out of my office. I walked over to the glass wall and watched him hurry across the bullpen toward the elevators. He did not even wait for the elevator doors to fully close before he had his cell phone pressed urgently against his ear. I knew exactly who he was calling. Beatrice was about to find out that her spiritual manipulation had just cost her the most important guest of honor at her fraudulent event. By noon, my smartphone was vibrating off the edge of my marble desk. Pastor Jenkins had made his frantic phone call. Beatrice's grand spiritual manipulation had completely collapsed, leaving her and Chloe entirely devoid of options, money, and religious backing. David's accounts remained frozen solid. The Atlanta house was quietly ticking closer to public foreclosure. But instead of accepting defeat, Chloe decided to escalate the war. She bypassed the legal system entirely and went straight to the court of public opinion. Chloe resorted to the modern currency of the desperate. She weaponized internet sympathy. I watched the live broadcast from my office computer. Chloe had positioned herself perfectly on her pristine white sofa, wearing an oversized, neutral-toned sweater to make herself look frail and vulnerable. Her blonde hair was styled to look effortlessly messy, and she pushed a single, carefully orchestrated tear down her cheek. She cried to her thousands of boutique followers that she and her sweet elderly mother-in-law were victims of severe financial abuse. She spun a tragic, masterful tale about an angry, wealthy relative who was aggressively freezing their family bank accounts and trying to destroy a sacred church-sponsored charity gala out of sheer spite and jealousy. She played the innocent small business owner flawlessly. She sobbed that this cruel relative was trying to crush her entrepreneurial dreams and humiliate a dedicated woman of faith. She never explicitly spoke my name, but the implications were heavy, precise, and entirely unmistakable. The internet loves a crying affluent victim. The video spread through the Atlanta social scene and the Heritage Congregation network like a wildfire fueled by gasoline. Within hours, the narrative was firmly set in their circles. I was the cold corporate monster destroying a loving family. But the internet mob did not come after me directly. My social media accounts were locked down, and my corporate pages were heavily moderated. Instead, the mob went after the softest, most accessible targets they could find. They went after my parents. My father, Elias, called me just after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The sound of his voice nearly broke my heart. He sounded fragile, older than his 68 years, and utterly exhausted by the sudden violent onslaught. Zealous church members and outraged boutique customers had found my parents' home phone number and their personal Facebook pages. The working-class heroes who had broken their backs performing manual labor so I could build my empire were now fielding hateful messages from strangers. They were being called greedy, unchristian, and toxic. "Maya, please," Elias said, his voice shaking with fatigue. "Your mother is in tears in the kitchen. The phone will not stop ringing. People are saying terrible things about how we raised you. Just give them the keys to that seaside place for the weekend. Let them have the house, Maya. Let them have their little party so they will leave us alone. We do not need this kind of drama in our lives." Hearing the absolute fear and weariness in my father's voice did not make me want to surrender. It turned my blood to absolute ice. David and Chloe had dragged my innocent parents into a war they had absolutely no part in. I told my father to unplug the landline, lock his doors, and trust me. I promised him the harassment would end by nightfall. I knew that giving in to emotional terrorists only guarantees future demands. Appeasing Chloe would only validate her victim routine. I did not call Chloe to argue. I did not engage in the toxic comment section of her viral video. Sending her a standard cease and desist letter directly would only give her more ammunition to wave crying in front of her followers, claiming I was legally bullying her. I needed to bypass her completely. I needed to cut off her oxygen supply. I hit the intercom and summoned my lead corporate counsel. I instructed him to draft immediate aggressive legal notices, but not to Chloe. I had the bank statements and wire transfer records proving exactly how David used my stolen corporate funds to pay for Chloe's boutique inventory and the extravagant dresses for the upcoming gala. I told my lawyers to send the formal letters directly to every single vendor, designer, and high-end supplier associated with Chloe's spring line. The letters explicitly informed the vendors that the capital used to purchase their goods was currently under active federal fraud investigation. We warned them that retaining those stolen funds could legally implicate their businesses in a massive financial crime. Corporate vendors do not care about family drama or Instagram tears. They care about liability. By sunset, Chloe had refused to surrender her fantasy. Believing public pressure would eventually force me to unlock the doors, she had brazenly flown up to Martha's Vineyard anyway. She stood right on the front lawn of my seaside mansion, trespassing on the lush grass, using the grand oceanfront columns as the backdrop for another live broadcast. I watched the stream on my tablet. Chloe was holding her phone high, telling her viewers that she was claiming her peace. She stated she was standing strong against the toxic relative trying to ruin her charity event. She smiled bravely for the camera, promising her followers that her exclusive spring collection was arriving any minute for a spectacular on-site gala preview. Right on cue, a massive commercial delivery truck turned into the long circular driveway of the estate. Chloe gasped with performative delight, spinning the camera around to show the massive vehicle approaching. "Look, guys!" Chloe squealed, her voice dripping with triumphant joy. "The gala inventory is finally here. We are not letting the haters stop our blessing." But the men who stepped out of the cab were not wearing standard delivery uniforms. They were wearing corporate repossession jackets. They did not walk to the back of the truck to unload expensive garment bags. The lead agent marched straight up to Chloe on the live feed, holding a thick metal clipboard and a legal writ. Chloe's smile froze as the man held up the paperwork directly in front of her broadcasting smartphone. "Chloe Vance," the agent announced, his voice booming over the live stream. "We are not dropping off inventory. We are executing an immediate repossession order. Every piece of clothing in your Atlanta boutique is currently being seized due to active fraud flags on the purchase accounts. We are here to repossess the remaining garments you transported to this location. Please step aside." The live broadcast cut out abruptly as Chloe fumbled her phone, dropping it face down onto the manicured grass. She lunged forward, trying to physically block the men in corporate jackets, screaming that there was a massive misunderstanding and threatening to call the police. The repossession agents completely ignored her hysterics. They marched right past her, flanked by local law enforcement officers, who had quietly pulled up behind the delivery truck to ensure strict compliance. Within 15 minutes, every single rack of designer dresses, Every velvet-lined box of accessories and every piece of staging equipment Chloe had illegally purchased was loaded back into the heavy truck. They drove away, leaving Chloe standing on the sprawling lawn of my seaside estate with absolutely nothing but a dead smartphone and a ruined reputation. Chloe stormed into the grand foyer of the mansion, her face streaked with ruined makeup and her hands shaking with unfiltered rage. David was pacing near the grand mahogany staircase, still desperately tapping at his frozen phone, trying to reach a banker who would not take his calls. Chloe did not hesitate. She shoved him hard in the chest, demanding he fix the disaster immediately. She screamed that her entire brand was destroyed, her investors would flee, and she was going to be a laughingstock in Atlanta. She demanded he transfer funds from a hidden account, a Cayman Island stash, anything to stop the bleeding. David backed away, holding his hands up defensively. He hissed at her to keep her voice down, frantically glancing toward the formal dining room. He told her there was no hidden cash. He admitted he had transferred the $150,000 into her LLC using fraudulent routing, and Maya's forensic accountants had locked everything down. There was no magic button to push. His empire was dust. A sharp, horrified gasp echoed from the hallway. Beatrice stood frozen under the crystal chandelier, clutching a silk shawl around her shoulders. She had been upstairs preparing her wardrobe for her fantasy gala, completely unaware of the repossession happening outside. She marched toward them, her eyes wide with shock. She demanded to know what David had just said. She demanded to know why her son had secretly funneled $150,000 to Chloe. Chloe did not cower. The fragile, sweet victim persona she maintained for her mother-in-law vanished instantly. Chloe crossed her arms, her blue eyes narrowing into venomous slits. She told Beatrice to shut up and stay out of adult financial matters. She sneered that David was just doing his job as a provider, investing in a legitimate business, instead of wasting money on Beatrice's ridiculous church social climbing. Beatrice swelled with righteous indignation. She pointed a trembling finger at Chloe's face, declaring her an ungrateful brat who was tearing the family apart. Beatrice proudly announced that she was the matriarch, the first lady of her congregation, and she commanded respect in her home. Chloe let out a sharp, mocking laugh that bounced off the marble walls. She stepped right into Beatrice's personal space. She called Beatrice a ghetto snob pretending to be royalty. She told Beatrice she was parading around in a stolen house living a fake billionaire lifestyle funded by a daughter-in-law she despised. Chloe did not stop there. She twisted the knife, revealing the ultimate secret David had been hiding. She told Beatrice that David had taken out a second mortgage on Beatrice's precious Atlanta home just to cover the stolen boutique funds. She smiled a wicked, cruel smile and informed Beatrice that her primary residence was currently in active foreclosure. The revelation hit Beatrice like a physical blow. The color drained from her face as she turned to David, who looked away, unable to meet his mother's eyes. The confirmation of his guilt pushed Beatrice over the edge. With a primal shriek of absolute fury, Beatrice swung her hand and slapped Chloe squarely across the face. The sharp crack echoed through the massive foyer. Chloe stumbled back, clutching her reddened cheek, her eyes wide with shock. Before she could retaliate, the heavy oak front door swung open. Marcus, Chloe's husband, and David's brother strode into the entryway. He had just arrived from the airport, expecting to walk into a lavish gala setup. Instead, he walked into a war zone. He saw his wife holding her face and his mother hyperventilating against the wall. Chloe immediately ran to Marcus, burying her face in his chest and wailing that Beatrice had assaulted her. Marcus wrapped his arms around his wife, his face contorting with rage. He glared at David, demanding to know what was going on. David, completely cornered and sweating profusely, tried to explain the frozen accounts, the repossession, and the foreclosure. Marcus did not care about David's excuses. He saw his wife humiliated and his own financial stability threatened. Marcus shoved his brother against the mahogany staircase railing. He demanded that David fix the situation right now. Marcus screamed that David needed to wire them cash immediately so they could hire a luxury litigation firm to sue Maya for ruining Chloe's boutique. He did not care about Beatrice's foreclosed home or David's frozen assets. Marcus demanded a massive cash payout for his own family's suffering, completely oblivious to the ironic fact that he was demanding Maya's money to sue Maya. There was simply no money left to extort. The shouting escalated into a deafening roar. Beatrice was sobbing hysterically about her lost home. Chloe was shrieking about lawsuits, and Marcus was physically pinning David against the stairs, demanding a bailout. The perfect unified family had turned into a pack of starving wolves, tearing each other apart for scraps. David managed to wriggle free from his brother's grasp. He held his hands up, shouting that he needed 5 minutes to make a phone call and fix everything. He practically sprinted away from his screaming family, locking himself inside the downstairs library. His hands were shaking violently as he pulled out his phone and dialed my private number. I was sitting comfortably in my penthouse suite, reviewing the repossession manifest when my screen lit up with David's name. I let it ring 3 times before calmly answering. "David," I said, making sure my tone was light and completely unbothered. "Maya, please." David begged, his voice a pathetic, breathless whimper. I could hear the muffled sounds of Marcus pounding on the heavy library door in the background. "They are going to kill me. My mother is having a breakdown. Marcus wants to sue you. Chloe is hysterical. I will do anything. I will sign whatever divorce papers you want. Just unlock one account. Just give me $50,000 to shut them up and get them out of here." I listened to the symphony of chaos happening behind him. I took a slow sip of my tea, feeling the absolute power of the moment. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the cold, precise authority of a woman holding all the cards. "I will not give you a single dime, David," I replied, "but I will offer you a path out of that room. I want a public apology from Beatrice. Tomorrow." I hung up the phone before David could formulate a single excuse. I knew exactly how the rest of that evening played out inside my seaside mansion. David, trapped in the library with nowhere to run, eventually had to open the door and face the pack of starving wolves he called a family. He had to deliver my ultimatum to a mother who had never apologized to anyone in her entire life. Beatrice was backed into a suffocating financial corner with Marcus breathing down her neck and Chloe demanding blood. She had absolutely no choice. But in her twisted reality, she convinced herself this was merely a transaction, an apology for a massive bailout. She likely envisioned me handing over a briefcase of cash and the deed to the Martha's Vineyard estate the moment she uttered the words. She severely miscalculated my intentions. The following afternoon, the coastal breeze was sharp and biting as I pulled my SUV up the long, curving driveway of my estate. I did not come alone. I opened the passenger doors for my parents, Elias and Maria. They hesitated, the memory of yesterday's vicious social media harassment still fresh in their minds. I linked my arms firmly through theirs. I told them to walk with their heads held high. This was my property earned through my relentless hard work, and today they were going to watch the very people who mocked them face reality. I unlocked my own front door and pushed it open. The grand living room felt like a funeral parlor holding a wake for Beatrice's ego. The entire family was assembled. Marcus stood by the massive stone fireplace, his arms tightly crossed, tapping his foot with aggressive impatience. Chloe sat as far away from Beatrice as physically possible, glaring venomously at her manicured nails. David looked like he had not slept in a decade. His eyes were bloodshot, darting frantically between me and his mother as we stepped into the room. Beatrice sat rigidly on the center sofa. She wore a tailored navy dress, desperately trying to project the image of an elegant matriarch holding court rather than a trespasser squatting in her daughter-in-law's home. When she saw my working-class parents flank me, her lip curled into a brief, involuntary sneer before she forced it into a tight, artificial smile. "Maya," David blurted out, his voice cracking slightly in the cavernous space. "You are here. Thank you. We are all ready to move past this unpleasantness." He turned to his mother, giving her a desperate, pleading nod. Beatrice stood up. She smoothed the front of her dress and lifted her chin. She deliberately ignored my parents, refusing to acknowledge their presence in the room. She locked eyes with me, channeling every ounce of her remaining arrogance into her posture. Maya, she began using her smooth, practiced church voice. David tells me you require a gesture of reconciliation before we resolve these unfortunate financial misunderstandings. She took a slow, deep breath, preparing to deliver the line she had undoubtedly rehearsed in the mirror all morning. I am sorry you felt offended when I claimed the house my son bought me. It was a masterclass in narcissistic deflection. She apologized for my feelings, not her actions. She doubled down on the absolute fiction that David had purchased the estate. She held out her hand, fully expecting me to accept this breadcrumb of respect, pull out my checkbook to fund Chloe's lawsuit, and hand over the keys to the vineyard. I looked at her outstretched hand. I looked at David, who was sweating right through his designer shirt. I looked at Chloe, who was practically vibrating with anticipation for a payout. I let the silence stretch until the discomfort in the room became physically suffocating. I do not accept, I stated, my voice echoing clearly off the vaulted ceilings. Beatrice's hand dropped to her side. Her fake smile vanished instantly. Excuse me? She snapped, her polite facade shattering to reveal the seething anger beneath. I did exactly what you asked. I humbled myself. Now tell your lawyers to unfreeze my son's accounts and fix this mess. I unclasped my leather tote bag. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope sent via certified priority mail. I walked across the plush rug and slapped the heavy envelope directly onto the glass coffee table in front of Beatrice. The loud smack made David jump. I didn't come for an apology, Beatrice, I said, keeping my gaze locked on hers with unblinking intensity. I came to deliver your mail from Atlanta. Your bank could not find you at your primary residence, so the urgent notices were forwarded to the business address of the individual who holds the secondary lien on the property. That would be me. Beatrice stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. Her hands trembled violently as she reached down and picked it up. She ripped across the sealed flap and pulled out a stack of dense legal paperwork bearing the bold red letterhead of her mortgage lender. Her eyes scanned the first page, tracking the heavy black text. All the remaining color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking hollow and terrified. She dropped the papers back onto the glass table, her knees giving out as she collapsed onto the sofa. It was a formal notice of foreclosure. The bank was seizing her Atlanta home in exactly 48 hours. Beatrice's manicured hands crushed the heavy watermarked paper of the foreclosure notice. The absolute silence in the grand living room shattered as the blood rushed back into her face, turning her pale complexion a mottled, furious crimson. She sprang up from the sofa, the paperwork trembling violently in her clenched fists. She pointed a jagged acrylic nail directly at my face, her voice rising to a hysterical, ear-piercing screech. "You did this?" Beatrice screamed, spittle flying from her lips as she lunged a step forward. "You vindictive, jealous little brat! You froze David's accounts and manipulated the bank into stealing my home. You orchestrated this entire nightmare just to humiliate me because you will never be a true part of this family." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood planted firmly on the hardwood floor, feeling the solid, comforting presence of my parents, Elias and Ruth, standing right behind me. "I did not mortgage your house, Beatrice," I stated, my voice slicing through the cavernous room like a steel blade. I slowly raised my hand and pointed a single finger directly at her trembling, sweating son. "Your golden boy did." David let out a strangled, pathetic gasp. He backed away, hitting his shoulder hard against the rough stone of the fireplace mantel. "Tell her, David," I commanded, refusing to break eye contact with my mother-in-law. "Tell your mother how you forged her signature on the secondary loan documents. Tell her how you leveraged the equity of her primary residence to extract $150,000 in cash. I did not steal your home, Beatrice." David handed it to the bank on a silver platter to pay for Chloe's fake inventory and your fraudulent little garden party. Beatrice whipped her head around to stare at David. The absolute certainty in my voice left no room for doubt, and David's terrified, guilty posture confirmed every single syllable. The pristine image of the perfect son evaporated in an instant. "David," Beatrice whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the ultimate betrayal. "David, what is she talking about? Tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not put my house up for collateral." David swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing erratically. "Mom, please, you have to understand. It was just a temporary bridge loan. I was going to pay it back before the bank even issued a warning. Maya's accounts were supposed to cover the gap, but she locked me out. She abandoned her duties as a wife. It was not supposed to happen like this." Beatrice dropped the foreclosure notice. The papers scattered across the glass coffee table like dead leaves. Her prized son, the brilliant financial mind she had paraded around her country club and her church for decades, had just admitted to rendering her homeless. "You mortgaged my house," Beatrice repeated, the reality finally penetrating her thick skull. "You risked the roof over my head for clothes." Chloe, who had been sitting rigidly on the far end of the sofa, suddenly stood up. "Do not look at me," she snapped, tossing her blonde hair defensively. "I had no idea where the money came from. David told me it was an early investment from his personal trust. He said he believed in my brand. He promised me capital." "Your brand is a money laundering scheme," Marcus roared. He stepped out from the hallway archway, his face twisted with pure, unfiltered rage. He marched straight toward David, his heavy boots echoing off the floorboards. "You put our mother on the street to fund my wife's failing vanity project. You dragged Chloe into your federal financial crimes." "Marcus, back off," David warned, holding his hands up defensively. "I was trying to help the family. Chloe was begging for capital, and Mom would not shut up about this stupid Martha's Vineyard event. I was carrying the entire financial weight of this family, while Maya hoarded her real estate money like a greedy tyrant." "Do not you dare blame my wife for your felonies," Marcus bellowed. Without a second of hesitation, Marcus grabbed David by the collar of his expensive designer shirt. He yanked his older brother forward and drove a brutal closed fist directly into David's jaw. The sickening crunch of bone meeting bone echoed loudly through the living room. David collapsed backward, knocking over a heavy bronze floor lamp as he crashed onto the Persian rug. He clutched his bleeding face, groaning in agony. But Marcus was not finished. He dove onto his brother, grabbing him by the lapels and slamming his back against the floorboards. David thrashed wildly, throwing blind, desperate punches that connected with Marcus's ribs. The two grown men, the shining examples of Beatrice's elite high society parenting, were rolling on the floor like brawling teenagers, destroying the elegant furniture in their path. Beatrice shrieked, hovering uselessly around the edge of the fight, screaming for them to stop. She grabbed at Marcus's jacket, but he shoved her away, sending her stumbling into an armchair. The violence was escalating fast. A heavy glass vase shattered against the stone hearth, sending razor-sharp shards flying across the polished floor. I immediately turned my back on the pathetic spectacle. I threw both my arms wide, creating a physical barrier between the flying debris and my parents. I placed my hands firmly on my father's shoulder and my mother's back. "Move." I instructed them, my tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "We are leaving the splash zone." I guided Elias and Ruth backward, steering them safely out of the grand living room and into the secure, tiled corridor near the kitchen. My father watched the chaotic brawl unfolding on my expensive rug. The initial shock and horror on his face slowly melted away, replaced by a profound, glowing look of pride. He looked at me, seeing the absolute, unshakable control I maintained over my domain. I was no longer the quiet daughter-in-law seeking approval from a family of snobs. I was an untouchable fortress protecting my own. In the corner of the living room, Chloe realized her husband was out of control and her boutique was gone forever. Her comfortable, subsidized reality had completely evaporated. But Chloe was nothing if not a supreme opportunist. She saw my parents safely behind me. She saw me standing tall and completely unharmed while the men in her life destroyed each other. She pulled her cell phone from her pocket and quickly dialed 911. She did not wait for the dispatcher to ask what her emergency was. Chloe immediately launched into an Oscar-worthy performance. She dropped to her knees, clutching the edge of a side table, and began sobbing hysterically into the receiver. "Please, you have to help us," Chloe cried, her voice quivering with perfectly manufactured terror. "Send the police to the oceanfront estate right now. We are being attacked. The homeowner is completely unhinged. She is trespassing on her own family. She brought aggressive people with her, and she is inciting a violent riot. Please hurry, my husband is bleeding and we are terrified for our lives." The distant wail of sirens cut through the heavy ocean air less than 10 minutes after Chloe ended her frantic theatrical emergency call. Inside the grand foyer, the blaring approaching sound acted like a bucket of ice water splashed directly onto the brawling brothers. Marcus froze, his heavy fists suspended mid-air above David's bruised and bloodied face. Beatrice let out a terrified gasp, clutching her crumpled foreclosure notice to her chest like a useless paper shield. Chloe, however, sprang into immediate action. She sprinted toward the heavy oak front doors, her face perfectly arranged into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. As two local police cruisers screeched to a halt on the circular driveway, casting harsh red and blue strobe lights across the manicured front lawn, Chloe burst out onto the grand stone portico. She threw her arms up in the air, weeping hysterically, as three officers stepped out of their vehicles, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. Chloe pointed a shaking accusatory finger directly at me as I stood calmly in the entryway, keeping my parents safely tucked behind me. "Help us, please," Chloe sobbed, her voice cracking with practiced, breathless desperation. "She broke into our home. She brought people with her. She is threatening my husband and terrorizing my elderly mother-in-law. Get her out of our house before someone gets killed." The lead officer, a tall, imposing man with a deeply lined face and a no-nonsense expression, immediately locked his eyes on me. He signaled for his partners to secure the perimeter and check on the men inside while he marched straight up the stone steps. He positioned his broad frame firmly between Chloe and me, holding a hand out to stop any sudden movements. "Ma'am, I need you to step back and keep your hands where I can see them." The officer ordered, his tone flat, authoritative, and completely devoid of warmth. He was addressing me, entirely taken in by Chloe's flawless, tear-soaked display of victimhood. Chloe let out a loud, dramatic whimper and huddled behind the officer's shoulders, playing the terrified, fragile damsel to absolute perfection. She peeked around his uniform, shooting me a venomous, triumphant glare that the police could not see. She truly believed she had won. She believed the authorities would drag me off my own property in handcuffs, leaving her to rule over the Seaside estate. I did not raise my hands in surrender. I did not raise my voice to argue. I did not attempt to match her manic, screaming energy. I simply smiled, offering a cold, polite expression that completely disrupted the chaotic, violent energy of the scene. I turned to my father, Elias, and gave him a brief, reassuring squeeze on the arm, before turning my full, undivided attention back to the lead officer. "Good evening, officer," I said, my voice maintaining a steady, professional, and conversational volume. "There is absolutely no need for alarm. No one has broken into this house. There is no home invasion taking place." Chloe let out an indignant, ear-piercing screech. "She is lying. Arrest her right now. She is trespassing on private property and inciting a riot. She does not belong here." I completely ignored my sister-in-law's shrieking. I reached slowly into my structured leather tote bag. The officer tensed slightly, his hand shifting on his belt, but I kept my movements deliberate, smooth, and entirely transparent. I pulled out a thick blue legal folder and my state-issued driver's license. I extended them smoothly toward the lead officer, holding them steady in the flashing police lights. "I am not going to stand here and argue with a hysterical guest," I stated clearly, projecting my voice so every officer on the porch could hear me. "I prefer to let the official paperwork speak for itself." The lead officer hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking the items from my hand. He opened the blue folder under the glow of his shoulder-mounted flashlight. Inside was the original certified master deed to the Martha's Vineyard estate, complete with the raised notary seals and the heavy municipal stamps. Stapled directly to the front page was the corporate registry, proving that my private holding company was the sole legal entity possessing ownership of the property. Directly below that was the operational agreement, establishing me as the sole managing director and primary stakeholder of that exact holding company. The officer looked at the deed. He looked at my driver's license. He looked at the perfectly matched names, the corporate tax identification numbers, and the corresponding signatures. The tension in his broad shoulders instantly evaporated. The defensive, aggressive posture he had taken against me vanished completely. He closed the folder with a solid, authoritative thwack and handed the documents back to me with a highly respectful, apologetic nod. Then he turned around slowly to face Chloe. Chloe was still sniffling, dabbing at her eyes, eagerly waiting for the officer to read me my Miranda rights. Instead, she found herself staring directly into the hardened, thoroughly unimpressed glare of a veteran cop who realized he had just been manipulated and lied to. "Ma'am," the officer said, his voice dropping a full octave, carrying a heavy, dangerous warning. "This is her property. You are the trespassers." Chloe's mouth dropped open, her jaw practically unhinged. The fake theatrical tears stopped instantly, drying up on her cheeks, as her brain completely failed to process the reality of the situation. She looked from the grim-faced police officer to my calm, smiling face, the illusion of her extravagant lifestyle shattering into a million jagged pieces right on my front porch. Behind her, Beatrice and David had finally crawled out of the foyer, leaning heavily against the doorframe, just in time to hear the officer's brutal declaration. David looked like a reanimated corpse clutching his bruised jaw. Beatrice looked as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the atmosphere. She stared at me, clutching the notice of her own impending homelessness, finally grasping the terrifying magnitude of my wealth and power. My parents, Elias and Ruth, stood quietly behind me. I could feel the tension leaving their bodies, replaced by a profound sense of awe. They watched in absolute silence as their daughter, the woman these snobs had relentlessly ridiculed, effortlessly commanded the entire situation without raising a single finger in violence. The officer turned back to me, glancing down at his heavy watch. "It is late, ma'am, and the local weather forecast shows a severe coastal storm picking up overnight. I will let them stay the night if you agree not to press trespassing charges immediately." He turned a stern, unforgiving eye back to Beatrice, Chloe, and David. "But if the owner of this property wants you out, you leave right now. Do you want them removed from the premises tonight?" I looked at the pathetic, broken group shivering on my porch. My arrogant mother-in-law clutching her foreclosure notice. My golden boy brother-in-law sporting a freshly bleeding lip from his own family. My entitled sister-in-law stripped of her boutique, her inventory, and her dignity. They were completely trapped, entirely dependent on my mercy. I smiled, a slow, calculated curve of my lips. "Oh, they can stay for the gala tomorrow," I replied smoothly, tucking my deed back into my tote bag. "I have a special surprise planned." I walked away from the grand portico, leaving the police officer to deal with the stunned, silent group of trespassers on my porch. I guided my parents back into my SUV, the heavy doors shutting out the flashing blue and red lights. We drove away from the Seaside estate in complete silence, the rhythmic sound of the tires on the gravel driveway providing a soothing soundtrack to my victory. I navigated the dark, winding island roads until we reached the luxury harbor hotel where I had reserved the penthouse suite. My legal team was already waiting in the expansive living area when we walked through the double doors. The mahogany dining table was covered in neat stacks of documents glowing under the warm light of the crystal chandelier. My lead attorney, a razor-sharp litigator named Harrison, stood up and smoothed his suit jacket. He pointed to two separate piles of paperwork. I guided my parents to the plush seating area near the balcony, ensuring they were comfortable with hot tea before I turned my attention to the business at hand. I sat down at the head of the table. Harrison slid the first stack of papers toward me. It was the final divorce decree. I stared at David's name printed in bold black ink. There was no hesitation, no lingering sorrow, and absolutely no regret. I picked up the heavy gold pen and signed my name on the dotted line, legally severing myself from the man who had tried to siphon my life savings to fund his family's delusional arrogance. I pushed the signed decree back across the table. Next, Harrison presented the federal documents. This was the kill shot. I read through the sworn affidavit detailing the exact nature of David's financial crimes. The document outlined the fraudulent secondary mortgage, the forged signatures on the loan agreements, and the illegal routing of funds into Chloe's dummy LLC. Every single wire transfer was tracked, time-stamped, and attached as an exhibit. I signed the federal affidavit confirming under penalty of perjury that I had absolutely no knowledge of the lien placed against Beatrice's Atlanta home and that David had executed the transaction through blatant identity theft. Harrison carefully collected the documents and placed them into a secure leather briefcase. He informed me that the local authorities were just the beginning. The magnitude of the wire fraud crossed state lines, elevating the entire situation to a federal level. I pulled out my phone and dialed the direct line to the regional office of the United States Marshals Service. I spent the next 20 minutes coordinating with a federal agent, providing them with the exact address of my Martha's Vineyard estate and the scheduled start time of Beatrice's high society event. They assured me they would be waiting in the wings. With the federal trap officially set, I turned to my parents. Elias and Ruth were watching me with a mixture of awe and profound vindication. I sat down next to them and took their hands. I promised them they would have front row seats to the gala tomorrow evening. They had endured decades of Beatrice's thinly veiled insults, her condescending remarks about our working-class background, and her relentless attempts to make them feel inferior. Tomorrow, they would watch her entire fake empire burn to the ground. To ensure their absolute safety and comfort, I finalized the contract with an elite private security firm. A team of highly trained, discreet operatives would escort us to the estate and maintain a secure perimeter around my family. No one would lay a hand on my parents ever again. Meanwhile, back at the oceanfront mansion, the atmosphere was thick with suffocating denial. The police had departed, leaving the family alone with the terrifying reality of their situation. Instead of packing her bags and figuring out where she was going to live, Beatrice retreated into a state of sheer, unadulterated delusion. She sat at the kitchen island, staring at the foreclosure notice before forcefully shoving it into the garbage disposal. In her warped mind, acknowledging the financial ruin would make it real. She convinced herself that if she just pulled off this incredible, luxurious event, she would secure her status among the elite. She believed God would provide a miracle, or perhaps a wealthy donor would simply write her a check to save her home. Beatrice had no money left in her accounts. Her credit cards were entirely maxed out. To pay the final balance for the caterers, the florists, and the staging crew, she had committed the ultimate act of desperation. She had taken out a predatory high-interest payday loan against the only asset she had left, a small retirement annuity that was barely enough to cover the exorbitant catering costs. She was literally gambling her survival on a single party. By sunrise, a fleet of white catering vans and delivery trucks began rolling up the long driveway. Dozens of workers flooded the property, erecting massive white tents on the manicured lawn, arranging hundreds of white roses, and setting up crystal champagne towers. Beatrice marched around the property in a silk robe, barking orders at the staff, completely ignoring the fact that she was effectively a squatter, hosting a party in the home of the woman she despised. While Beatrice orchestrated her fake royal ball, David was in a state of sheer panic. He knew the police visit was just a warning shot. He knew the moment I handed over the deed, his financial crimes would be heavily scrutinized. He packed a small leather duffel bag in the guest room, his hands shaking so violently he could barely zip it closed. He crept down the back staircase, avoiding Marcus and Chloe, who were currently screaming at each other in the library about imminent bankruptcy. David slipped out the side door, stole the keys to Beatrice's rental car, and sped away from the estate. He drove recklessly down the winding coastal roads, desperate to reach the ferry terminal. His plan was simple: escape the island, catch a flight out of Boston, and disappear before the federal indictments dropped. He abandoned the rental car in the terminal lot and sprinted toward the ticket counter, throwing his credit card onto the desk. He demanded the next available seat on the ferry to the mainland. The ticketing agent swiped his card. She frowned, tapping her keyboard. She swiped it again. She looked up at David, shaking her head. She informed him that his card was declined. David cursed, pulling out his phone to purchase a digital ticket directly from his banking app. He opened his profile, his eyes widening in absolute horror. Every single account was locked. His emergency credit lines were frozen. He tried to log into his airline app to secure a flight, only to find that his frequent flyer profile had been flagged and suspended for fraudulent activity. I had not just frozen the stolen funds. My forensic accountants had flagged his entire financial identity. David stared at the bold red error messages on his phone screen. The terminal walls seemed to close in around him. He had no cash, no credit, and no way to purchase passage across the water. He was completely trapped on the island with absolutely nowhere to go but back to the mansion to face the ultimate reckoning. David drove the stolen rental car back up the winding coastal road, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. When he finally pulled through the wrought iron gates of the estate, the sun was beginning to set, casting long dramatic shadows across the manicured lawns. The transformation of the property was staggering. Beatrice had ignored every single warning sign and plunged headfirst into her grandiose delusion. Massive white canvas tents were erected over the sprawling back patio. Delicate fairy lights twinkled against the encroaching twilight. A live string quartet was stationed on the veranda, playing soft, classical melodies that drifted over the crashing ocean waves. Valet attendants were actively parking luxury vehicles as dozens of Atlanta's most elite socialites and senior church members arrived. Beatrice stood at the top of the grand sweeping staircase, bathed in the warm glow of the crystal chandelier. She wore an absurdly expensive emerald green silk gown, draped in pearls, that she had undoubtedly put on a maxed-out credit card. She was beaming, gripping the hands of wealthy congregation members, welcoming them to what she loudly referred to as her new summer sanctuary. She played the role of the pious blessed matriarch to absolute perfection, entirely blocking out the fact that her primary residence was being seized by the bank. Chloe was equally committed to the theatrical production. She stood near the towering ice sculpture and the champagne pyramid, wearing a backless designer dress and holding a crystal flute. She was actively cornering a group of prominent church investors, laughing brightly as she spun a web of total fiction. She confidently informed them that her boutique was undergoing a massive, aggressive expansion. She lied through her teeth, claiming she had intentionally cleared out her old inventory to make room for an exclusive high-end European line. She was soliciting new investments, desperately trying to secure cash to replace the funds I had frozen. David did not join the festivities. He lurked in the darkened corner of the formal dining room, keeping his back pressed firmly against the expensive wallpaper. He poured himself his fourth glass of neat bourbon, his hands trembling so violently that the amber liquid sloshed over the rim and stained his cuffs. The dark purple bruise on his jaw from Marcus's brutal punch was throbbing, poorly concealed by a layer of Chloe's makeup. He was sweating profusely, darting his bloodshot eyes toward the front doors every time a new guest entered. He knew he was a cornered rat. He knew his accounts were locked, his identity flagged, and his escape route severed. He was just waiting for the axe to fall. By 8 o'clock, the estate was packed. Waiters carried silver trays of caviar and oysters through the glittering crowd. Beatrice moved gracefully toward the small stage that had been set up near the edge of the cliff. She tapped the microphone, a bright, satisfied smile plastered across her face as she prepared to deliver her welcome speech and officially claim my home as her own. Before she could utter a single syllable, the string quartet stopped playing. It was not a gentle fade-out, but an abrupt, jarring halt as the cellist pulled his bow away from the strings. A heavy, confusing silence rippled through the hundreds of attendees. Heads turned. Conversations died in the middle of sentences. The heavy, solid mahogany front doors swung open with a resounding thud that echoed through the grand foyer and out onto the patio. I stepped over the threshold, bringing the crisp, cool ocean air into the stifling, perfume-heavy room. I was flanked by my parents, Elias and Ruth. We did not look like the working-class outsiders Beatrice had spent years belittling. We looked like absolute royalty. My mother wore a breathtaking, custom-tailored sapphire gown that fell perfectly around her frame. Her hair swept up into an elegant twist. My father stood tall in a sharp, impeccably fitted black tuxedo, radiating a quiet, unshakable dignity. I walked arm in arm with them, wearing a sleek ivory column dress that commanded the immediate attention of every single person in the room. The crowd parted for us like the Red Sea. The wealthy donors and church elders stared in awe, completely captivated by our entrance. We walked with slow, deliberate precision right through the center of Beatrice's fantasy. Beatrice gripped the microphone stand so hard her knuckles turned white. The color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her emerald gown looking harsh against her ashen skin. She stared at my parents, the very people she had continuously mocked for their humble beginnings, now parading through her elite gathering, looking vastly superior to everyone in attendance. Her sheer narcissism immediately overrode her panic. She could not bear to be humiliated in front of her congregation. She refused to let her grand illusion die. Beatrice leaned aggressively into the microphone, her voice booming over the speaker system, sharp and shrill. "Security," she commanded, pointing a trembling finger directly at me and my parents. "Remove these wedding crashers immediately. They are trespassing on my property. Escort them off the premises right now." Around the perimeter of the estate, 6 broad-shouldered men in dark tailored suits immediately stepped forward. They were the elite private security team I had contracted just hours earlier. The crowd gasped and stepped back, anticipating a physical altercation. The guards marched swiftly in perfect unison, cutting through the sea of terrified guests. Beatrice smiled, a triumphant, wicked smirk spreading across her face as the heavy footsteps approached us. She fully expected to watch my parents be physically dragged out the front doors. The security team reached the center of the patio. They did not grab my arms. They did not touch my father or my mother. Instead, the 6 towering guards spun around in perfect synchronization. They formed an impenetrable human wall directly in front of us, crossing their arms and locking their cold, unforgiving stares squarely on Beatrice. They flanked me, not her, creating a protective barrier that no one in the crowd would dare cross. The security team did not budge. They stood like stone statues, their broad shoulders forming a barricade between my parents and the furious woman on the stage. Beatrice's jaw went slack. The microphone trembled in her grip, producing a harsh, screeching feedback loop that made several guests wince and cover their ears. She stared at the 6 operatives who had just mutinied against her, completely failing to understand that I was the one signing their paychecks. I did not give her a second to process the betrayal. I stepped smoothly through the gap in my security wall, leaving Elias and Ruth safely guarded behind me. I walked right up to the small stage, my heels clicking sharply against the polished wood. Beatrice was paralyzed. I reached out and plucked the microphone directly from her stiff, manicured fingers. She did not even try to resist. I turned to face the sea of glittering gowns and tailored suits. Hundreds of eyes were locked on me, wide with morbid fascination. "Welcome to my home, everyone," I announced, my voice echoing crystal clear across the sprawling lawn and over the crashing ocean waves. "I am so glad Beatrice could host you on my property tonight." A collective gasp rippled through the elite crowd. Champagne flutes paused halfway to people's mouths. The wealthy church donors exchanged bewildered glances, whispering furiously to one another. Beatrice finally snapped out of her paralyzed state. The sheer humiliation of being called a guest at her own triumphant gala ignited a fiery, desperate rage inside her. She lunged forward, her emerald gown catching on a stage monitor, her hands clawing wildly for the microphone. "Liar!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice raw and hysterical, completely devoid of her usual pious elegance. "She is lying. My son bought this estate for me. He is a highly successful wealth manager. Security, arrest this woman." The guards did not move an inch. I simply took a graceful step back, keeping the microphone firmly in my grasp. I offered Beatrice a smile dripping with pity. Then I raised my free hand and gave a sharp, definitive nod to the back of the lawn. My executive assistant, Sarah, was standing in the shadows of the audiovisual tent. She immediately hit a button on her soundboard. The massive high-definition outdoor movie screen, which Beatrice had rented to display promotional videos for her church charity, suddenly flickered to life. The soft ambient lighting of the gala dimmed, forcing every single eye toward the glaring white screen. Projected 20 feet high for all of Atlanta's high society to see was the certified master deed to the Martha's Vineyard estate. I pointed up at the screen, letting the silence stretch for a theatrical, agonizing moment. "As you can clearly read," I told the crowd, my voice cutting through the night air like a blade, "this property belongs entirely to a private holding company. If you look at the operational agreement displayed directly below the deed, you will see my name listed as the sole managing director and 100% stakeholder. David did not buy this house. He could never afford this house. Beatrice is trespassing. Beatrice turned around, staring up at the massive projection. Her eyes scanned the legal seals, the notarized signatures, and my name printed in bold black ink. Her legs gave out. She stumbled backward, catching herself on the podium, gasping for air, as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the coastal atmosphere. The facade of the wealthy, blessed matriarch was entirely shattered. The whispers in the crowd escalated into loud, angry murmurs. But I was not finished. The public execution had only just begun. I turned my attention away from the crumbling woman on the stage and directed my gaze to the front rows where the senior church committee members and wealthy congregation donors were seated. And for those of you who donated to Beatrice's building fund tonight, I continued, my voice echoing with unrelenting authority. You should know exactly where your money is going. Beatrice's primary residence in Atlanta was foreclosed on this morning. Total pandemonium erupted. People stood up from their chairs. Several women gasped in absolute horror. Beatrice let out a guttural, wounded sob, covering her face with her hands, but there was nowhere to hide. She is completely broke, I announced, making sure every syllable landed with devastating precision. Because her golden boy son, David, committed wire fraud. He secretly took out a massive secondary mortgage against her home, stole all the equity, and used it to fund Chloe's completely bankrupt boutique. The crowd turned into a mob. The illusion of Beatrice's divine prosperity was completely obliterated. The church elders, men and women who had just handed over massive checks, believing they were contributing to a legitimate divinely ordained charity, realized they had been conned by a family of desperate fraudsters. The whispers morphed into shouting. I want my check back right now, a prominent church deacon roared, storming toward the donation tables set up near the champagne pyramid. This is a scam. You are stealing from the congregation. Other donors instantly followed his lead. Dozens of wealthy attendees swarmed the collection boxes, demanding their funds, shouting at the terrified catering staff who had no idea what to do. The elegant gala had officially devolved into a chaotic riot. On the other side of the patio, Chloe pushed her way through the angry mob. She had been standing with a group of potential investors, spinning her web of lies about a massive European expansion. Now those investors were looking at her with absolute disgust, backing away as if she were carrying a plague. Chloe's face was flushed dark red with panic and fury. She shoved a waiter out of her way and marched toward the stage, pointing an accusatory finger at me. It is a lie! Chloe shrieked at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with pure desperation. Do not listen to her. She is a jealous, vindictive liar. My boutique is thriving. We are making millions. Do not touch those donation boxes. She spun around, desperately trying to corral the retreating investors. She flashed a manic, terrifying smile, promising them that my documents were fake, that it was all a pathetic smear campaign. Right in the middle of her frantic, screaming denial, the heavy silence of reality struck. Chloe's designer smartphone buzzed violently in her hand. It was a loud, obnoxious alarm that cut right through her hysterical shouting. Chloe froze. She looked down at the bright screen. The notification banner was impossible to ignore. Her bank app flashed a critical alert. Her business accounts, her personal checking, her emergency credit lines were not just frozen anymore. The screen displayed a stark, unyielding message confirming that all funds had been officially seized by her creditors. Chloe stared down at the glowing screen of her phone. Her manicured fingers trembling so violently, she nearly dropped the device onto the stone patio. The bold red notification confirming the complete seizure of her boutique's bank accounts reflected in her wide, terrified eyes. The smug, entitled sister-in-law, who had spent years mocking my career and flaunting her supposed business acumen, was now staring directly at total, inescapable bankruptcy. Her mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish, unable to formulate a single word of defense. Around her, the chaos of the ruined gala reached a fever pitch. The wealthy donors and senior church members were furious, shouting over one another, demanding accountability from the family they now realized was nothing more than a pack of desperate con artists. Caterers abandoned their serving trays, retreating toward the kitchen to avoid the angry mob. The string quartet had already packed their instruments and fled into the night. Then a new sound cut through the shouting. It was not the high, frantic wail of local police cruisers. This was a heavy, deep, and aggressive siren blaring in the distance, growing louder by the second. The angry crowd quieted their heads, turning toward the long, winding driveway. The sharp crunch of gravel echoed through the night air as two massive matte black SUVs tore up the path toward the estate. Their red and blue grille lights flashed ominously, casting harsh, sweeping shadows against the white canvas of the party tents. The vehicles did not park neatly. They screeched to a halt right at the edge of the grand portico, boxing in the catering vans and completely blocking the main exit. The heavy doors of the SUVs swung open simultaneously. Men and women wearing tactical vests, bearing the bold yellow letters, U.S. Marshal, stepped out into the cool ocean air. The rioting donors instantly froze, parting like a parted sea. The sheer, overwhelming federal authority radiating from these agents commanded absolute and terrified silence. Atlanta's elite socialites clutched their pearls and backed away, not daring to interfere. I stood calmly near the stage, my parents flanked safely behind our wall of private security. The lead agent, a tall, imposing woman with a stern face and a clipped, purposeful stride, walked directly onto the patio. She did not look at the expensive floral arrangements. She did not look at the towering champagne pyramid. She did not even glance at me or my parents as she passed our protective barrier. Her eyes were locked onto a single specific target. David realized he was trapped. He had been cowering in the darkened corner of the formal dining room, peering through the French doors at the unfolding disaster. When he saw the tactical vests, pure panic took over. He spun around desperately, trying to scramble toward the kitchen to find a back exit. He did not make it 3 steps. 2 broad-shouldered agents intercepted him, stepping seamlessly into his path and blocking the doorway. The lead agent marched straight up to him, halting just inches from his sweating, trembling face. "David Williams," she announced, her voice carrying easily across the dead-silent patio. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, felony forgery, and aggravated identity theft." David's knees visibly buckled. He raised his hands, shaking his head rapidly as he tried to summon his smooth-talking, confident wealth manager persona. He stammered, attempting to deny the charges, attempting to blame a clerical error, but his voice cracked into a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. An agent grabbed him roughly by the shoulders, spun him around, and shoved him face first against the elegant white floral archway. The metallic, heavy click of steel handcuffs echoed sharply over the crashing ocean waves. The golden boy of the family, the man who had stolen his own mother's home to fund his sister's delusions, was reduced to a weeping, hyperventilating coward in front of the very society he worshipped. Chloe watched her brother being shackled from across the patio. Instead of rushing to his defense, her ruthless survival instincts kicked in. She realized her entire glamorous life was over, and she immediately decided to sacrifice her own flesh and blood to save herself. She sprinted forward, her designer heels clicking frantically against the stone. "I had nothing to do with it," Chloe shrieked, pointing an accusatory, shaking finger directly at David's back. "He lied to me. He told me the money came from a private investor. I did not know the funds were stolen. I am a victim here. You have to believe me." David twisted his head, staring at his sister in pure, unfiltered betrayal. His jaw dropped as she threw him under the federal bus without a second of hesitation. The lead marshal turned a slow, unimpressed glare onto Chloe. She looked the frantic woman up and down, completely unmoved by the theatrical display of victimhood. "Save your story for the grand jury," the agent replied flatly, her voice dripping with professional disdain. "Chloe Williams, you are currently under active federal investigation for receiving and laundering stolen funds across state lines. I strongly advise you not to leave the state. We have already frozen every single asset attached to your name." Chloe let out a strangled, breathless gasp. Her knees gave out completely. She collapsed heavily onto a velvet lounge chair, clutching her chest as the reality of her situation crushed the air from her lungs. Her boutique, her reputation, her carefully curated elite status, and her freedom were all entirely gone. Beatrice watched the absolute destruction of her legacy unfold from the edge of the stage. Her mind could no longer reject the reality of her ruin. Her golden son was being dragged away in chains, his face pressed against a police vehicle. Her daughter was facing federal indictment and total bankruptcy. Her home in Atlanta belonged to the bank. The wealthy friends she had spent decades trying to impress were currently staring at her with profound, unapologetic disgust. Desperate for a single, solitary lifeline, Beatrice frantically scanned the crowd. Her eyes locked onto Pastor Evans, the senior leader of her congregation. He was standing near the edge of the patio, clutching his voided donation check, looking at her as if she were a carrier of the plague. Beatrice dropped to her knees right there on the hard stone patio. She crawled toward him, her emerald green silk gown snagging on the rough ground, tearing at the seams, and dragging through a puddle of spilled champagne. She wept hysterically, reaching out with trembling, desperate hands to grab the hem of his tailored suit jacket. "Pastor, please!" Beatrice wailed, her voice a pathetic, broken rasp that sounded completely foreign to the arrogant woman she had been just hours earlier. "You must help us. You must tell them who we are. The church must protect its own. Tell them I am a devoted woman of God. Please, I am begging you." Pastor Evans looked down at the ruined, groveling woman at his feet. He did not offer a comforting hand. He did not offer a prayer. He did not offer a single ounce of grace. With a look of absolute chilling contempt, he slowly and deliberately pulled his jacket away from her grasping hands. "You have disgraced this congregation," he stated coldly, his voice echoing with finality. He turned his back on her, blending into the departing crowd, and walked away into the dark night, leaving Beatrice completely alone in the wreckage of her own making. The taillights of the federal SUVs faded down the long gravel driveway, taking the golden boy of the Williams family straight to a federal holding cell. The flashing red and blue strobes disappeared, leaving the patio bathed only in the cold, unforgiving glow of the security lights. The remaining elite guests scrambled toward the valet stand, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive scandal. Waiters and catering staff quietly packed their equipment, eager to flee the disastrous scene. I stood on the stone steps, looking down at the pathetic figures remaining on my patio. Beatrice was still slumped on the ground, her emerald gown ruined, her chest heaving with dry, broken sobs. Chloe was frozen in the velvet lounge chair, clutching her dead smartphone, staring blankly into the dark abyss of her immediate bankruptcy. I stepped forward, the sound of my heels cutting through the night air. I signaled to the imposing captain of my private security team. The 6 towering guards immediately stepped out of their defensive formation and flanked me, their hands resting easily on their belts. "The party is over," I announced, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "You have 5 minutes to get off my property before I have you both arrested for trespassing." Beatrice's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face twisted into a mask of pure frantic desperation. She looked at my cold, unyielding expression and realized I was a stone wall. I would not offer her a single cent, a single night in a guest room, or a single ounce of mercy. Her survival instincts kicked in, overriding whatever shred of pride she had left. If she could not manipulate me, she would target the people she believed were weaker. She turned her desperate, bloodshot eyes toward my parents. Elias and Ruth stood together on the veranda, watching the spectacular downfall of the woman who had tormented their daughter for years. They looked regal, poised, and entirely unmoved by the tears of a con artist. Beatrice scrambled to her feet, stumbling over the torn hem of her silk gown. She lunged toward the veranda, her hands reaching out in a pathetic display of begging. 2 of my security guards immediately stepped into her path, blocking her from getting anywhere near my family. Beatrice fell to her knees on the bottom step, looking up at my mother with wild, pleading eyes. "Ruth, please!" Beatrice wailed, her voice cracking into a hideous, guttural sob. "You have to help me. We are family. We share a grandchild. You know what it is like to struggle. Please talk to Maya. Do not let her put me out on the street. I have nowhere to go. The bank took everything. Have mercy on me." The sheer audacity of her plea hung heavily in the salt-tinged air. This was the same woman who had mocked my mother's modest wardrobe. This was the same woman who had loudly complained about my parents' working-class manners at our wedding. This was the woman who had tried to steal my life savings and leave me destitute. Now stripped of her stolen wealth and fake prestige, she was begging a retired public school teacher for salvation. My father, Elias, placed a steady protective hand on my mother's waist. He did not say a word. He did not need to. He simply yielded the floor to his wife. Ruth looked down at the weeping, ruined matriarch. There was no anger in my mother's eyes. There was no petty vindictiveness. There was only the cold, hard pity of a woman who had built a real life watching a fake one collapse. She smoothed the skirt of her custom sapphire gown and took one deliberate step toward the edge of the stairs. "For years you called us trash," Ruth said, her voice steady, powerful, and ringing with absolute clarity. "You looked down your nose at us. You told us we did not belong in your world. You told Maya she was not good enough for your son. You paraded your stolen money around as if it made you better than honest, hardworking people." Beatrice sobbed louder, burying her face in her hands, but my mother did not stop. "You were right about one thing, Beatrice." Ruth continued, her tone dropping to a sharp, icy whisper that commanded total silence. "This house is not for you. You do not belong here. It is for us." Without another word, my mother raised her arm and pointed a single unwavering finger directly toward the wrought iron front gates. "Get out," Ruth commanded. Beatrice let out a devastated wail, finally breaking completely under the crushing weight of her absolute defeat. My security guards did not give her a moment to recover. Two massive men gripped Beatrice by her arms, lifting her off the stone steps with effortless ease. They marched her down the driveway, her expensive heels dragging uselessly through the gravel as she sobbed into the night. I turned my attention to Chloe. She was still sitting in the lounge chair, completely catatonic, clutching her phone as if it might magically restore her seized bank accounts. "You too, Chloe," I said sharply. "The marshals advised you not to leave the state, but they did not say you could stay here. Walk." Chloe blinked, shaking off her paralysis. Her eyes darted frantically around the empty patio. Her brother was in federal custody. Her mother was being physically dragged down the driveway. Her boutique was gone. The survival instinct finally kicked in, replacing her shock with a sudden venomous burst of entitlement. She shot up from the chair, smoothing her backless designer dress. "I am not leaving without my things!" Chloe shrieked, her voice shrill and demanding. "I have tens of thousands of dollars worth of custom luggage in the guest suite, my Louis Vuitton trunks, my Chanel bags, my exclusive inventory. If you think you are stealing my luxury goods, you are out of your mind. I demand you retrieve my property immediately." I smiled, a slow, calculating curve of my lips. I nodded to the captain of the security team. "Bring the lady her belongings," I instructed calmly. 4 guards jogged into the grand foyer and marched up the sweeping mahogany staircase. Chloe crossed her arms, tapping her foot impatiently, lifting her chin in a pathetic attempt to reclaim her shattered dignity. She truly believed that even in defeat, she would drive away with her precious material symbols of wealth. She believed she could at least pawn her luxury items to survive the coming federal indictment. Less than 2 minutes later, the heavy wooden front doors swung open. The security guards emerged carrying Chloe's massive, supposedly high-end suitcases, but they did not walk down the steps to hand them to her gracefully. At my silent signal, the guards hoisted the heavy bags into the air and hurled them directly off the top of the portico. Chloe screamed as the luggage flew through the air and crashed violently onto the hard, jagged gravel of the circular driveway. The impact was devastating. The supposedly indestructible luxury trunks shattered upon hitting the ground. The flimsy metal zippers immediately snapped. The fake leather seams ripped wide open. Chloe's entire world spilled out onto the dirty pavement. The bags did not contain custom European inventory or high-end couture. They were packed to the brim with cheap synthetic knockoffs. Flimsy polyester dresses with fraying hems spilled across the gravel. Handbags with glued-on crooked designer logos tumbled into the dirt. Bundles of cheap tarnished brass jewelry scattered across the driveway, the fake gold paint already peeling off. The truth of Chloe's glamorous boutique was literally exposed on the ground. She had been ordering cheap counterfeit garbage from overseas factories, slapping fake labels on them, and selling them to unsuspecting women in Atlanta at a massive markup. It was yet another layer of fraud in the Williams family empire. Chloe dropped to her knees in the gravel, desperately trying to gather the cheap synthetic fabrics to her chest, weeping as the fake designer labels blew away in the ocean breeze. I stood on the porch with my parents, watching the final undeniable proof of their fake wealth scatter into the dirt, knowing that by morning, the entire world would know the truth. By morning, the entire world did know the truth. The local news networks ran the story on a continuous, relentless loop. They broadcast shaky cell phone footage of the federal raid, the chaotic seizure of the Martha's Vineyard estate, and the humiliating spectacle of Chloe's counterfeit empire blowing across the gravel. The Williams family name, which Beatrice had spent decades trying to polish into high society gold, was now synonymous with a spectacular federal crime ring. But I was no longer on the island, breathing in the salty coastal air. I was sitting in a windowless, freezing interrogation room inside the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta. The environment was stark, smelling of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Agent Miller, the lead investigator assigned to dismantle David's financial web, sat across from me at a scarred metal table. He slid a thick, heavily tabbed manila folder between us. Inside lay the shattered pieces of my husband's career. We spent 4 grueling hours going over the exact timeline of his deception. I calmly verified every wire transfer log, every fake invoice Chloe had generated to launder the cash, and the forged secondary mortgage documents David had filed against Beatrice's home. Agent Miller was astounded by the surgical precision of the trap I had set. David had foolishly believed he was the smartest person in the room, constantly underestimating my financial literacy. He had left digital fingerprints all over the banking network. I provided the feds with a flawless, undeniable paper trail that separated my legitimate holding company assets from the toxic stolen money David had frantically moved across state lines. Every piece of evidence I handed over drove another nail into his coffin. Just as we were wrapping up the final deposition, the heavy steel door of the interrogation room clicked open. A junior agent stepped inside, his expression tight, and whispered something into Miller's ear. Agent Miller frowned, running a hand over his face before turning back to me. He explained that David's defense attorney had just filed an urgent, highly unusual request. David was currently sitting in a temporary holding cell down the hall, awaiting his initial arraignment before a federal judge. He was absolutely refusing to cooperate with his own legal counsel until he spoke to me. He was begging for 5 minutes of my time. Agent Miller strongly advised against it. He warned me that cornered fraudsters always try one last desperate manipulation tactic to play on their victims' emotions. He told me I owed David nothing. But I did not feel threatened, and I certainly did not feel vulnerable. I felt entirely untouchable. I needed the absolute finality of looking him in the eye one last time. I nodded and agreed to the meeting. I was escorted down a sterile, echoing concrete corridor to a secured visitation room. The space was divided by a thick pane of reinforced, smudge-covered glass. I sat down in the rigid plastic chair and waited. When the heavy steel door on the opposite side finally slid open, I barely recognized the man shuffling into the booth. The bespoke Italian suits, the arrogant swagger, the meticulously groomed facade were completely gone. David was wearing a bright orange oversized county jumpsuit. His wrists were shackled to a heavy chain wrapped around his waist, the metal clinking loudly with every defeated step he took. He looked physically smaller, his face haggard, his eyes wide and bloodshot from a night spent in a concrete cell. He dropped heavily into his chair and picked up the black telephone receiver with trembling hands. I picked up mine, keeping my posture straight and my expression completely blank. He started weeping the second the line connected. The sound of his jagged, hysterical sobbing crackled harshly through the cheap plastic speaker. He pressed his forehead against the glass, squeezing his eyes shut as he spun a pathetic, carefully constructed narrative designed to evoke my sympathy. Maya, please, you have to listen to me. David begged, his voice cracking under the weight of his own self-pity. You do not understand the crushing pressure I was under. The insurmountable weight of being a successful black man in a ruthless corporate world. I had to prove we belonged there. I was just trying to build generational wealth for our family. Beatrice demanded absolute perfection from me since I was a child. I only wanted to be the savior. I was trying to elevate us all out of mediocrity, so we would never have to struggle again. Please, Maya, remember the man you married? Tell the agents I acted in a state of diminished capacity. I can fix this. I can make the money back. Just do not let them lock me away. I sat perfectly still, letting him exhaust himself with his desperate performance. I felt no anger, no sorrow, and absolutely no pity. I looked right through the thick glass at the pathetic hollow shell of the man who had traded his morality for an illusion. You didn't elevate anyone, David, I said, my voice dropping to a cold, unforgiving register that echoed sharply through the receiver. You tore us down to feed your mother's ego and a white woman's greed. You chose your pride over your wife. Enjoy prison. I hung up the phone with a sharp, definitive click, instantly cutting off his hysterical, begging sobs. I did not look back as I walked out of the visitation booth. I marched straight back into Agent Miller's office, picked up his pen, and signed the final legal declaration under penalty of perjury. My signature officially sealed the federal indictment against my husband. As I stepped out of the interrogation suite and into the busy courthouse hallway, David's frantic defense attorney rushed toward me, his hands raised in a placating gesture, begging me to sit down for a plea negotiation. I did not say a single word to him. I simply reached into my designer briefcase, pulled out a thick notarized manila envelope, and slapped it hard against the center of his chest. I handed his lawyer the divorce papers turned on my heel and walked out the heavy glass doors into the blinding Atlanta sun. The blinding Atlanta sun felt different that afternoon. It felt like absolute freedom. I did not look back at the courthouse, nor did I spare a single thought for the panicked lawyer standing in the lobby holding the dissolution of my marriage. The air was crisp, the sky was a perfect cloudless blue, and for the first time in over a decade, I belonged entirely to myself. While my life moved forward into the light, the Williams family plunged rapidly into a dark, inescapable freefall. The collapse of their empire was not a slow decline, it was a swift, brutal demolition. 2 days after David was formally arraigned, the bank finalized the foreclosure on Beatrice's sprawling Atlanta estate. She had spent weeks ignoring the warnings, pretending her divine favor would magically produce a miraculous financial rescue. Instead, the only people who arrived at her wrought iron gates were county sheriffs and a court-appointed eviction crew. Beatrice stood on the manicured front lawn in a stained silk robe, her hair unkempt, screaming scripture, and hurling curses at the movers as they carried out her gaudy, oversized furniture. She demanded they leave her crystal chandeliers and imported rugs, completely failing to accept that none of it belonged to her anymore. The bank seized everything of value to cover the massive debts David had fraudulently accumulated against the property. Her desperate calls to her wealthy friends went entirely to voicemail. The elite social circle she had ruthlessly clawed her way into dropped her with terrifying speed. Pastor Evans delivered the final fatal blow to her reputation. During a Sunday service, he stood before the congregation and officially denounced her actions, stripping her of her title as a senior church elder and permanently banning her from the premises. Beatrice was socially radioactive. With 0 assets and 0 allies, she was forced to pack her remaining clothes into garbage bags and move into a cramped, dilapidated one-bedroom apartment on the far outskirts of the city. Her new reality consisted of peeling linoleum floors, water-stained ceilings, and the constant hum of a nearby highway. There were no caterers, no grand staircases, and no audience to applaud her fake piety. She was left with nothing but the echoing silence of her own failure. Chloe's demise was equally spectacular. Federal investigators descended on her boutique with ruthless efficiency. The sleek, frosted glass doors of her storefront were padlocked and plastered with federal seizure notices. Agents spent an entire afternoon hauling out boxes of her cheap counterfeit inventory, tossing the synthetic garments and fake leather bags into the back of industrial transport trucks to be liquidated. The business she had built on a foundation of stolen money and sheer arrogance evaporated into thin air. When the stolen funds dried up, so did Marcus's loyalty. He had only ever stuck around for the luxury vacations, the expensive dinners, and the illusion of high society prestige. The moment Chloe's credit cards began declining, he packed his bags. Chloe begged him to stay sobbing in the hallway of their downsized apartment, promising him that she would bounce back, that she just needed a little more time to secure a new investor. Marcus did not even bother to argue. He stepped over her designer luggage, handed her the apartment keys, and walked out the door without a backward glance. Unable to process her total defeat, Chloe retreated to the only place she thought she still held power. She set up her ring light in her empty living room and recorded a tearful, highly edited video for her social media followers. She played the victim sobbing beautifully for the camera, claiming she had been completely manipulated by her older brother and unfairly targeted by a jealous sister-in-law. She begged her followers to support her new crowdfunding campaign to help rebuild her brand. The internet did not show her a shred of mercy. The comment section devolved into an absolute bloodbath. Former customers who now realized they had paid hundreds of dollars for cheap overseas knockoffs ripped her apart. They flooded her page with screenshots of her federal indictment details, exposing her direct involvement in the wire fraud scheme. Influencers she had previously bullied made reaction videos mocking her downfall. The backlash was so swift and severe that Chloe was forced to permanently delete all her social media accounts before the sun went down. She was erased from the digital world just as thoroughly as she was erased from Atlanta high society. Hundreds of miles away, the coastal air of Martha's Vineyard was peaceful. I stood on the back patio of the estate, listening to the rhythmic crash of the ocean waves against the cliffs. The property had been professionally cleaned and restored to its natural, dignified beauty. The massive party tents were gone, the ridiculous ice sculptures had melted away, and the lingering stench of Beatrice's cheap perfume had been completely scrubbed from the halls. The sun was beginning its slow descent over the horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of deep violet and brilliant gold. There was no live string quartet, there were no flashing cameras, no wealthy donors to impress, and no fake smiles. It was just me, my father Elias, and my mother Ruth. We sat together at a small, rustic wooden table overlooking the water. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick, leather-bound portfolio. I slid it across the table toward my parents. Elias looked at me, his weathered hands hesitating for a fraction of a second before he opened the cover. Inside rested the newly minted, legally binding deed to the estate. I had officially transferred full ownership of the property entirely into their names. Ruth touched the heavy paper, her eyes tracing the legal seals. She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes, but they were not tears of greed or entitlement. They were tears of profound, overwhelming gratitude. Elias reached across the table and covered my hand with his silent strength, conveying more love than any grandiose speech ever could. They had spent their entire lives sacrificing their own comfort to ensure I had every opportunity to succeed. Now they finally had a sanctuary of their own, completely safe from the predatory grasp of the Williams family. We sat together in the fading daylight, enveloped in a genuine, unshakable peace. The next morning, I was sitting on the veranda with a hot cup of black coffee, watching a pair of sailboats drift lazily across the harbor. My phone chimed softly against the glass patio table. It was a secure message from Agent Miller. I opened the encrypted document and read through the brief federal update. David had broken. After spending a week in a concrete cell stripped of his tailored suits and his mother's constant validation, the reality of a massive public federal trial had finally terrified him into submission. Knowing the mountain of flawless evidence I had provided would guarantee a devastating conviction, his defense attorney had negotiated a final plea agreement. David had officially pleaded guilty to all charges of wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. He had traded his right to a trial to avoid a 2-decade sentence. The judge had accepted the plea. David Williams was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. I locked the screen of my phone, took a slow sip of my coffee, and watched the tide roll in. 6 months passed since that notification illuminated my screen. Half a year since the Williams family name was permanently scrubbed from the elite social registries of Atlanta and permanently etched into federal prison logs. In that time, my life had not merely stabilized, it had skyrocketed. Divorced from David's parasitic financial drain and toxic ego, my holding company expanded with ruthless efficiency. We acquired 3 new commercial properties in the downtown sector, and our quarterly profits officially doubled. I became a fixture in the very boardrooms David had desperately tried to gatekeep. Investors respected me. Competitors feared me. I was completely unbothered by the whispers and rumors that still occasionally floated through the city. I had surgically removed the rot from my life, and the resulting growth was spectacular. My primary residence was now officially the Martha's Vineyard estate, but business still required occasional trips back to Georgia. It was during one of these brief, highly scheduled visits that the universe decided to offer me one final, exquisite gift. I had a flight to catch in 3 hours and needed to pick up a custom wool trench coat I had dropped off for cleaning earlier in the week. The dry cleaner was located in a depressing, aging strip mall on the far outskirts of the city, miles away from the manicured avenues of Buckhead. It was a place defined by flickering fluorescent lights, cracked linoleum flooring, and the suffocating, humid smell of industrial starch and chemical solvents. I pushed open the heavy glass door, the cheap brass bell ringing sharply above my head. I walked up to the scuffed laminate counter and waited, listening to the loud hiss of the steam presses operating in the back room. A woman emerged from the sweltering heat of the pressing area, her arms loaded with a massive bundle of heavy clothes wrapped in thin plastic. She was wearing a hideous, stiff polyester uniform shirt in a bright, unforgiving shade of blue. Her posture was stooped, her movements sluggish and heavy with absolute exhaustion. She dumped the bundle onto the sorting rack, sighing bitterly as she turned around to face the register. She froze. The plastic hangers clattered loudly against the floor. Beatrice stood paralyzed behind the counter. The physical transformation was staggering. This was the woman who used to refuse entry into any restaurant that did not offer VIP valet parking. This was the matriarch who had ridiculed my mother's modest dresses, who had proudly flaunted stolen wealth, and who had sneered at honest working-class labor. Now her expensive salon highlights had grown out into harsh, unkempt gray roots. Her skin, once plumped with costly serums, looked sallow, sweating, and deeply lined under the harsh overhead lights. Her hands, previously adorned with massive diamonds and weekly manicures, were red, cracked, and ruined by harsh chemical solvents and relentless manual labor. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a horrifying cocktail of pure shock, agonizing humiliation, and absolute defeat. She tried to speak, but her mouth only opened and closed uselessly, completely robbed of the venom and haughty arrogance that used to flow so freely from her lips. She looked down at my tailored silk suit, my pristine leather handbag, and then down at her own sweat-stained polyester uniform. The reality of our reversed fortunes crushed whatever pride she had left. I did not sneer at her. I did not raise my voice, and I did not offer a mocking smile. I simply stood there, radiating calm, untouchable power. I placed my yellow paper claim ticket onto the counter. Beatrice reached out to take it, her raw hands shaking violently. She turned to the automated conveyor belt, her fingers fumbling over the keypad to retrieve my coat. It took her 3 agonizingly slow attempts to hit the right buttons. When she finally brought the wrapped garment to the counter, she kept her eyes glued to the register screen, absolutely terrified to look at my face. The total was $24. I opened my handbag and pulled out a crisp, brand-new $100 bill. I laid it smoothly on the counter right next to her trembling fingers. Beatrice stared at the money. Then slowly, agonizingly, she lifted her gaze to meet mine. There was no defiance left in her, There was no manipulation to deploy. There was only the crushing, inescapable reality of her new impoverished life. I looked her dead in the eye, my expression devoid of any mercy, pity, or sympathy. "Keep the change, Beatrice," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly detached. "It looks like you need it." I draped the coat over my arm, turned on my heel, and walked out the door. The cheap brass bell chimed one last time, sealing her inside her personal polyester prison. I drove straight to the airport and boarded my flight back to Massachusetts. By the time my car pulled up the winding gravel driveway of the coastal estate, the sun was already beginning its descent, painting the horizon in sweeping streaks of fiery orange and bruised purple. The air was crisp, carrying the clean, sharp scent of sea salt and pine trees. I walked through the grand foyer, dropping my bags, and stepped out onto the back veranda. My parents were already there, wrapped in thick knit sweaters against the evening chill. They were sitting together on the plush outdoor sofa, 2 glasses of deep red wine resting on the table between them. Elias looked up as the heavy wooden screen door clicked shut behind me. He smiled, setting down his book, his eyes searching my face with that familiar quiet parental intuition. He had known the trip back to Atlanta would bring up memories. He knew the ghosts that city held for me. "Are you okay, baby?" Elias asked, his voice rough and incredibly gentle. I walked over to the edge of the porch and leaned my hands against the cool wooden railing. I looked out at the vast, darkening ocean, listening to the rhythmic, soothing crash of the waves against the rocks below. I thought about David sitting in a concrete cell for the next 8 years. I thought about Chloe hiding in obscurity after being publicly destroyed by her own vanity. I thought about Beatrice steaming shirts under fluorescent lights for minimum wage. Then I looked at my parents, sitting in the absolute safety and luxury of a home they had earned, enveloped in peace. I took a deep, cleansing breath of the salty air, letting it fill my lungs and clear away any lingering shadows of the past. I smiled, a real bright smile that reached my eyes. I'm exactly where I belong.